They said I'd lost my mind. Can you imagine? My own family stood in front of a judge and declared that I, Rosalind May Thornwood, was mentally unfit to manage my own affairs. They had doctors lined up, witnesses prepared, legal documents drafted. They'd planned it all so carefully, so methodically. They thought they had it all figured out. They thought an 80-year-old woman would be easy to defeat. They were wrong. But let me tell you something that made it even worse. When that judge finally delivered his verdict, when all the evidence was laid bare, when the truth came crashing down around them like a house of cards in a hurricane, he didn't just dismiss their case. Oh no, he declared them fraudsters, every single one of them. And then he did something that made my heart sing with justice. He ordered criminal investigations into every member of my family who'd participated in this scheme. Some of them went to prison. Some of them lost everything. And me? I'm still here, still standing, still living in my home on my own terms, managing my own life at 80 years old. But I'm getting ahead of myself again, aren't I? You need to understand how we got here. How a family could turn on one of their own so completely. How greed can twist people into monsters you don't even recognize anymore. So let me start at the beginning. Because this story, this battle, this war I fought for my freedom and my dignity, it deserves to be told from the very first moment. Hi, my name is Rosalind May Thornwood. My parents named me Rosalind after Rosalind Franklin, the scientist whose work on DNA was stolen by men who got all the credit and the Nobel Prize while she got nothing. My mother said she named me that as a reminder to never let anyone take what's rightfully mine, to fight for recognition, to stand up for myself no matter what the cost. She had no idea how prophetic that name would become, how many times in my 80 years I would have to fight to keep what was mine, to prove my worth, to defend myself against people who should have protected me but instead tried to destroy me. 80 years old, 8 full decades of living on this earth. I was born in 1945. Right as World War II was ending, right as the atomic age was beginning. My earliest memories are of the 1950s, that supposed golden age of American prosperity that wasn't quite so golden if you were poor or black or female or any combination thereof. I grew up in the Cold War, practiced duck-and-cover drills in school, like hiding under a desk would save us from nuclear annihilation. I watched the civil rights movement unfold on our black and white television. I saw men walk on the moon. I lived through Vietnam, Watergate, the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9/11, the Great Recession. I've seen more change in my lifetime than most people can imagine. I've adapted, evolved, learned new technologies, stayed current with the world. But apparently, to my family, being 80 means you're automatically senile, incompetent, ready to be put out to pasture like an old horse that can't work anymore. I live in Savannah, Georgia, in a historic home in the Victorian district. It's a stunning 3-story townhouse built in 1884, with original heart pine floors that have been walked on for over a century, 12-foot ceilings with ornate plaster medallions, crown molding that was hand-carved by craftsmen whose names are long forgotten, and a wraparound porch where I sit every evening with sweet tea and watch the world go by. The house has floor-to-ceiling windows that let in floods of that golden Georgia light. A grand staircase with a mahogany banister worn smooth by generations of hands, fireplaces in every room with original marble mantels, and a garden out back where camellias and azaleas bloom in profusion every spring. I bought this house in 1982 with my late husband, Gerald. We paid $85,000 for it, which seemed like a fortune at the time. The house had been neglected for years, was practically falling down. Needed everything from a new roof to updated plumbing to structural repairs. But we saw its potential, saw what it could become with love and work and investment. We spent 2 years renovating it, doing much of the work ourselves on nights and weekends. Now it's worth $3.5 million, maybe more. That appreciation, that value, that's what started all this trouble. That's what turned my family into strangers, willing to do anything to get their hands on what I'd built. But let me tell you about how I got here, about the life I built, about the woman I was before my family tried to erase me, tried to declare me incompetent, tried to steal everything I'd worked for. Because you need to understand that I didn't just wake up one day at 80 years, old with wealth that fell from the sky. Every penny, every asset, every bit of security I have, I earned it. I worked for it. I sacrificed for it. I built it from nothing. I grew up in Augusta, Georgia, the youngest of 5, children in a family that struggled every single day just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. My father, Thomas Whitmore, worked at a textile mill, the kind of back-breaking factory work that destroyed men's bodies by the time they were 50. He'd come home every night covered in lint and cotton dust, coughing, exhausted, but he never complained, not once. My mother, Elizabeth Whitmore, took in laundry and ironing to make ends meet. I remember the house always being full of steam and the smell of starch. My mother standing at the ironing board for hours, pressing other people's clothes, other people's linens, earning pennies per item. We were poor, not destitute, not homeless, but poor enough that I wore my sister's hand-me-downs until they were more patches than original fabric. Poor enough that Christmas meant one toy and an orange in your stocking if you were lucky. Poor enough that going to the movies was a once-a-year treat we looked forward to for months. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house with one bathroom that 6 people shared. I slept in a room with my 2 sisters in a bed we all 3 squeezed into. Privacy was a luxury we couldn't afford. But my parents believed in education with an almost religious fervor. They scraped together every penny they could to make sure we all finished high school, which wasn't a given for poor kids in the 1950s and early 1960s. A lot of children dropped out at 14, 15 to work and help support their families. The money was needed, and many parents didn't see the point of education beyond basic literacy. But my parents insisted we stay in school, said education was the only way out of poverty, the only way to build a better life than they'd had. My father would say, "You can take away everything a person has except what's in their head. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can steal from you." He was wrong about that last part, as it turns out. People can try to steal your knowledge by declaring you incompetent, by saying you can't think clearly anymore, by taking away your right to use your own mind. But he was right that education was valuable, that it opened doors that would otherwise stay locked forever. I graduated high school in 1963, second in my class of 247 students. I was 17 years old, academically accomplished, hungry for more learning, dreaming of college. I wanted to become a teacher, maybe even a professor someday. I loved literature, loved history, loved the idea of spending my life helping young people discover the joy of learning. But there was no money for college. My older siblings had their own families by then, their own struggles, their own barely making it lives. My parents were in their 50s, worn down by decades of hard labor, getting more tired every year. College seemed like an impossible dream, a luxury for rich kids whose parents could afford tuition and room and board and all the other expenses that came with higher education. So I got a job as a secretary at a law firm in Augusta, Johnson, Miller and Associates, a small practice that handled wills and property disputes and the occasional criminal case. I was 18 years old, just graduated, with skills in typing and shorthand that I'd learned in high school business classes. I could type 80 words per minute without errors, could take dictation at speeds that impressed even the senior partners. I made $60 a week, which seemed like a fortune compared to what my mother made taking in laundry. I gave half to my parents for room and board, repaying them for all the years they'd sacrificed to keep me in school. The other half I saved, penny by penny, in a savings account at the local bank, dreaming of maybe someday affording night classes at the community college. That's where I met Gerald Thornwood. He was a young attorney who'd just joined the firm, fresh out of law school at Emory University in Atlanta. He was 26, I was 19. He came from money, from a good family in Atlanta with old Southern wealth, the kind of family that had country clubs and debutante balls and trust funds. He'd had every advantage I'd never had: private schools, college without student loans, connections and opportunities that opened doors before he even had to knock. But despite all that privilege, or maybe because he was secure enough in it not to need to prove anything, he was kind. He didn't treat me like I was just a secretary, just a working-class girl with no prospects, just someone beneath his notice. He talked to me like an equal, asked my opinions on cases he was working on, listened when I spoke instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. We started with coffee breaks that stretched longer than they should have, conversations about books we'd both read, discussions about current events and politics and philosophy. He'd bring me books from his personal library, things I'd never have been able to afford on my own, first editions, classics, contemporary novels that hadn't made it to the public library yet. We'd talk about them over lunch. debating themes and characters and what the authors were really trying to say. Those conversations were intoxicating to me, like water after years in a desert. I'd been starving for intellectual engagement, for someone who took my thoughts seriously. We fell in love slowly over the course of a year, over coffee and books, and working late and conversations that stretched long past closing time. Gerald told me later that he'd fallen for me the first time. I'd challenged one of his legal arguments, pointing out a flaw in his reasoning on a property dispute case. He said most people treated him with deference because of who his family was, but I'd told him he was wrong without a second thought, and he'd found that refreshing, exciting even. When he finally asked me out on a proper date, taking me to a nice restaurant instead of just eating sandwiches in the office break room, I said yes without hesitation. We dated for 6 months before he brought me home to meet his family, and that was when I discovered just how different our worlds really were. The Thornwood family lived in a mansion in Buckhead, the wealthy section of Atlanta. Literally a mansion, with columns and a circular driveway and a foyer bigger than my entire childhood home. There were servants, actual servants, a cook, a housekeeper, a gardener, people whose entire job was to make the Thornwood family's life comfortable. I'd never seen wealth like that up close before, and it was overwhelming, intimidating, made me acutely aware of every way I didn't fit in. Gerald's mother, Catherine Thornwood, looked at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. She was cold, polite in that cutting Southern way that manages to insult you while maintaining perfect manners. She asked about my family, my background, my education, and with each answer I gave, her expression grew more disapproving. She didn't say outright that I wasn't good enough for her son, but she didn't have to. It was in every look, every pause, every careful word. His father, Harrison Thornwood III, was more direct. At dinner that night, he actually asked Gerald in front of me if he was sure he wanted to throw his life away on someone so unsuitable, someone who couldn't bring connections or wealth or status to the marriage. He talked about me like I wasn't even there, like I was a piece of furniture being considered for purchase and found wanting. Gerald's sisters were polite but distant, clearly taking their cues from their mother. They talked about people and events I'd never heard of, dropped names of debutantes and society functions and country clubs, making it clear that I was an outsider who would never truly belong in their world. I should have run. Any sensible person would have seen that this relationship was doomed, that the class divide was too wide, that his family would never accept me. But I loved Gerald, and more importantly, Gerald loved me. He held my hand through that awful dinner, challenged his father's rudeness, made it clear that his choice of partner was not up for family debate. And when we left that mansion that night, he proposed to me right there in the car, saying he'd rather have a life with me than all the approval and money his family could offer. We got married in March of 1965 at the courthouse in Augusta. With just 2 witnesses, we pulled from the hallway. His family didn't attend. My family couldn't afford to take the day off work, and honestly, I think they were intimidated by the idea of mixing with the Thornwoods, even though the Thornwoods refused to come. It was just us, standing before a judge, promising to love each other for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. We meant those vows, every word of them. The consequences were immediate and severe. Gerald was cut off from his family inheritance completely. The trust fund that had been set up for him was revoked. His parents wrote him out of their will. They told him he was welcome to come home when he came to his senses and left me. But until then, he was on his own. It was brutal, final, meant to force him to choose between me and his comfortable life. But Gerald didn't care about their money or their approval. He worked hard, built his own practice, made his own way in the world, and I worked right alongside him. I wasn't content to just be a wife, to stay home and keep house and have babies. That wasn't who I was. I had ambitions, dreams, capabilities that I wasn't willing to let go of just because I'd gotten married. I continued working as his secretary at first, but it wasn't enough. I wanted more. I enrolled in night classes at Augusta College, working toward my bachelor's degree in business administration. It was exhausting, working full-time during the day and going to school at night, coming home to study until midnight or 1 in the morning, surviving on coffee and determination. But I did it. It took me 6 years of night classes, but in 1971, I graduated with my bachelor's degree. Gerald threw me a party, invited everyone from the law firm, made a toast saying he'd never been prouder of anyone in his life. I was 26 years old, the first person in my family to earn a college degree, and I felt like I could do anything. But I didn't stop there. I enrolled in an MBA program, again taking night classes, again balancing work and school and managing our household. This was the early 1970s, and women in MBA programs were still rare, still treated like curiosities, or threats by male students who didn't think we belonged there. I faced discrimination from professors who called on me less, from study groups that wouldn't include me, from career counselors who suggested I might be happier in a secretarial role than in management. But I persisted. I graduated with my MBA in 1977 at the age of 32. With my degree and my experience, I became more than just Gerald's secretary. I became his business manager, his partner in building the law practice. I handled all the finances, managed the office, hired and trained staff, negotiated contracts with clients, developed marketing strategies. I was good at it, really good at it. Gerald always said he couldn't have built his practice without me, that I was the backbone of everything we accomplished. The practice grew from a small 2-attorney firm to a thriving practice with 8 attorneys and support staff, with a reputation throughout Southeast Georgia as the place to go for estate planning and business law. We made good money, not Thornwood family money, but good money. Money we'd earned ourselves through hard work and long hours and smart decisions. We lived comfortably, saved diligently, invested wisely. We bought a nice house in Augusta, took modest vacations, lived well but not extravagantly, and we kept hoping for children. God, how we wanted children. We'd always imagined having a big family, 3 or 4 kids filling our house with noise and laughter and chaos. We tried from the moment we got married, but month after month, year after year, there was nothing. No pregnancy, no baby, just disappointment and heartbreak. We saw doctors, specialists, the best fertility experts we could find in Georgia. In the 1970s, we underwent test after test, tried every treatment available at the time. Nothing worked. The doctors couldn't find a specific reason why we weren't getting pregnant, which somehow made it worse. If there had been a clear medical problem, we could have addressed it, fixed it, done something. But there was just unexplained infertility, that frustrating diagnosis that means the doctors don't know why. It's not working. By the time I was 35 in 1980, we'd been trying for 15 years. The doctors gently suggested we consider other options: adoption, fostering, accepting that biological children might not be in our future. The grief of that, the loss of the family we'd dreamed of having, it was profound. I mourned the babies I'd never carry, the children I'd never watch grow up, the family photos that would never exist. Gerald mourned too, though he tried to be strong for me. Tried to say that as long as we had each other, we had everything we needed. We talked seriously about adoption. We filled out applications, went through home studies, prepared ourselves to welcome a child who needed a home. But as we got deeper into the process, we realized our hearts weren't in it. Not because we didn't want to adopt, not because we thought adopted children were less than biological children, but because we'd spent 15 years grieving the specific children we'd imagined having together, and we weren't ready to let that dream go yet. It wasn't fair to a child who deserved parents, who were fully present and committed, not still mourning the biological children they'd never had. So we made a different choice. We decided to pour our love and energy into each other, into our work, into building a life that was fulfilling even without children. We threw ourselves into the law practice, into making it the best it could be. We started traveling more, taking trips to Europe and Mexico and Canada, seeing the world in ways we couldn't have done with children. We bought art and collected books and created a home that reflected who we were and what we loved. And in 1982, when we were ready for a change, ready to start a new chapter, we decided to leave Augusta and move to Savannah. We'd always loved Savannah when we visited, loved the historic architecture and the oak trees dripping with Spanish, moss, and the proximity to the ocean. Gerald's law practice had a good reputation, and he had clients who would follow him wherever he went. We could start fresh there, build a new life in a beautiful place. That's when we found the house. It was in terrible condition, had been vacant for 3 years, was on the market for a fraction of what it should have been worth, because most buyers were scared off by how much work it needed. But we walked through it and saw not what it was, but what it could become. We saw the beautiful bones, the original architectural details, the potential for something magnificent. We paid $85,000 for it, which was all we could afford after selling our house in Augusta and taking out a substantial mortgage. Then we spent the next 2 years bringing it back to life. Gerald learned plumbing and electrical, work from books and from hiring contractors for a few hours to teach him the basics. I learned to refinish wood floors, strip and repaint walls, restore original fixtures. We worked nights and weekends, did most of the labor ourselves to save money, hired contractors only for the things we absolutely couldn't do ourselves, like structural repairs and the new roof. By 1984, the house was finished, and it was gorgeous. We'd restored it to its original Victorian glory while updating it with modern conveniences. Every room was beautiful, every detail considered, every choice made with love and care. That house became our baby, the thing we poured all the love we'd have given to children into. We filled it with furniture we refinished ourselves, with art we collected on our travels, with books that lined every available wall. We created a home that was uniquely ours, that reflected our lives and our love and our values. Gerald's law practice thrived in Savannah. He became known as one of the best estate planning attorneys in Southeast Georgia, someone people trusted with their most important decisions about their wills and trusts and legacies. He had clients from all over the state, wealthy people who could have gone to any attorney but chose Gerald because of his reputation for integrity and expertise. And I continued to manage everything behind the scenes, the business operations that made it all possible. We lived well, but we remained relatively modest despite our success. We didn't buy luxury cars or join country clubs or flaunt our wealth. We invested most of what we earned, saved for retirement, made smart financial decisions. Gerald would always say, "We grew up knowing what it was like to have nothing. Let's make sure we never have to worry about that again." So we built financial security slowly and steadily over decades of careful planning. By the time Gerald retired in 2005 at the age of 66, we were more than comfortable. We weren't billionaires or even multimillionaires, but we had the house paid off completely. We had healthy retirement accounts from decades of maximum contributions. We had a diversified investment portfolio that provided good income. We had Social Security. We were secure in a way that neither of us had been as children, and that security felt like the greatest achievement of our lives. Gerald and I had 17 more years together after his retirement. Good years, happy years, years of traveling and reading and enjoying each other's company without the stress of running a business. We took cruises and visited national parks and spent weeks at a time in cities we'd always wanted to explore. We had season tickets to the Savannah Philharmonic. We volunteered at the library and at a literacy program. We had friends, a social life, hobbies, and interests. We lived fully, gratefully, knowing we were lucky to have found each other, lucky to have built this life together. Gerald died in 2012. He had a stroke while we were having breakfast, just collapsed at the table, and by the time the ambulance got there and got him to the hospital, the damage was done. He lived for 3 days in the ICU, but he never regained consciousness. I sat by his bed holding his hand, talking to him, telling him I loved him, saying goodbye to my partner of 47 years. When he finally passed, when the monitors went flat and the nurses gently led me from the room, I felt like part of my soul had been ripped away. He was 73 years old. We'd been married for 47 years, nearly 5 decades of partnership, of love, of building a life together. When he died, I was 67 years old, and suddenly I was alone for the first time since I was 19. The grief was overwhelming. For months, I barely functioned. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for him, forgetting for that first horrible moment that he was gone. I'd set the table for 2 before remembering I was eating alone. I'd start to tell him something I'd read or thought of before the reality crashed over me again that he wasn't there to hear it. His will left everything to me, which was simple and straightforward since we'd never had children. The house, the retirement accounts, the investments, everything became mine alone to manage. His law partner, Margaret Chen, who'd taken over the practice when Gerald retired, helped me navigate all the legal and financial tasks that come after death. She was kind and patient and didn't rush me through anything, understanding that I was grieving and needed time. For several years, I lived quietly in my grief and my routines. I had friends from book club and garden club, women I'd known for decades. I volunteered at the Savannah Public Library twice a week, helping with literacy programs. I took classes at the community college just for fun, things like art history and creative writing and world religions. I traveled some, taking the trips Gerald and I had planned, but now going alone or with friends. I lived comfortably on his retirement income combined with Social Security, never touching the principal of our investments. The house continued to appreciate in value as Savannah's historic district became more and more desirable. Real estate agents would occasionally knock on my door asking if I wanted to sell. Some were polite, others pushy. I always said no. This was my home, mine and Gerald's. The thought of selling it, of leaving all these memories, was unbearable. I intended to stay here until the day I died. Now, I need to tell you about my family. Remember, Gerald and I never had children, but I had siblings, and they had children, and those children had children. 4 generations of family beyond me, my siblings, my nieces and nephews, my great-nieces and great-nephews, my great-great-nieces and great-great-nephews. I'd stayed in touch with them over the years, but we weren't particularly close. They had their lives scattered across Georgia and beyond. I had mine in Savannah. I sent birthday cards with checks for the younger generations, attended weddings and graduations when I could make the trip, showed up for funerals when family members passed away. At Christmas, I'd send gifts to the children in the family, but we weren't the kind of family that got together every Sunday for dinner or knew every detail of each other's lives. We were pleasant, distant, connected by blood but not by daily involvement. Most of my siblings had passed away by 2018. I was the youngest and had outlived most of them. Of my 4 older siblings, only my sister Dorothy was still alive, and she was in a nursing home in Macon with advanced dementia, no longer recognizing anyone. My brothers and my other sisters had died of various causes: cancer, heart disease, complications from diabetes. Their children, my nieces and nephews, were in their 60s and 70s now, and their children, my great-nieces and great-nephews, were in their 40s and 50s. Whole sprawling family tree of people related to me, but not really part of my daily life. But in 2018, something changed. Suddenly, I was hearing from family members I hadn't heard from in years. My nephew Derek, my oldest brother's son, started calling regularly. Just to check in, he said. Just to make sure Aunt Rosalind was doing okay. Then his sister Patricia started visiting every few weeks, driving down from Atlanta to take me to lunch, to sit with me on the porch, to chat about family and life and everything in general. Then their children started showing up, and cousins, and second cousins. Suddenly, my quiet home was filled with family members I barely knew, all wanting to spend time with me, all concerned about how I was doing, all offering to help with things around the house. At first, I was genuinely touched. After years of mostly solitude, of being alone in this big house, it felt nice to have family around. I thought maybe they'd realized I wasn't getting any younger, that they wanted to make sure I wasn't lonely, that they genuinely cared about my well-being. I welcomed them into my home, made dinners for them, showed them the renovations Gerald and I had done, shared stories about the old days and their parents and grandparents, who were gone now. I was naive. I was so desperately naive. The questions started casually, woven into normal conversation. Derek would be helping me move a piece of furniture or fix a squeaky door, and he'd say something like, "This house must be worth a fortune now, with the way Savannah real estate has appreciated. Have you had it appraised recently?" I'd deflect, say I wasn't interested in selling, change the subject. Patricia would be looking at family photos with me and she'd say, "Do you have a will, Aunt Rosalind? Have you thought about what happens to all this when you're gone?" Again, I'd deflect, say it was all taken care of, not something I wanted to discuss. But they persisted. Every visit, every phone call, the conversation would somehow turn to my assets, my plans for the estate, who would inherit what. They'd ask if I'd thought about selling the house and moving somewhere smaller, somewhere that would be easier to maintain. Wouldn't I be happier in one of those nice senior living communities where there were activities and people my age and medical care on site? Wouldn't it be better to sell now while I could still enjoy the money? Distribute it to family while I was alive so I could see them benefit from it. I kept deflecting, kept insisting I was happy where I was, kept making it clear I wasn't interested in discussing my finances or my estate plans with them, but they wouldn't let it go. The pressure was subtle but constant, like water dripping on a stone, slowly wearing away at my resistance. Then Derek showed up one day in June 2018 with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but an elder law attorney named Howard Blackwell, who specialized in estate planning and guardianship cases. Derek introduced him as someone who could help me get my affairs in order, make sure everything was properly organized for when I passed away, ensure that my estate wouldn't be tied up in probate. I should have shown them both the door immediately. I should have recognized this for what it was, a coordinated attempt to get control of my assets. But I was polite, raised in an era where you didn't throw guests out of your home, even when they showed up uninvited, with agendas you didn't appreciate. So I let them in, made coffee, listened to Howard Blackwell's pitch. He was smooth, professional, sympathetic. He talked about how important it was to plan ahead, to make sure my wishes would be carried out, to protect my assets from estate taxes and probate costs. He said that at my age, 73 at the time, I really should consider setting up a revocable living trust with family members as co-trustees, people who could step in if I became unable to manage things myself. He suggested giving someone power of attorney, someone who could handle financial decisions if I became incapacitated, someone who loved me and had my best interests at heart. All of it sounded reasonable on the surface, but there was something in the way Derek was watching me. Something in the way. Howard Blackwell kept emphasizing my age and the risks of trying to handle everything myself. That set off alarm bells in my head. This wasn't about protecting me. This was about positioning family members to take control. I told them thank you, but no thank you. I said I had my own attorney, Margaret Chen, who'd handled Gerald's estate and who handled my legal matters. If I needed any changes to my estate planning, I'd work with her. I appreciated their concern, but I didn't need their help. The moment I said that, Derek's face changed. The concerned nephew facade slipped, and I saw anger flash across his features. Aunt Rosalind, I really think you should listen to Mr. Blackwell. He knows what he's talking about. You don't want to make decisions like this on your own at your age. I'm 73, Derek, not senile, I said sharply. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions, and I've made my decision. Thank you both for coming, but I think it's time for you to go. Howard Blackwell tried one more approach, his voice taking on a tone of gentle condescension. Mrs. Thornwood, I understand this is uncomfortable. Nobody likes to think about their own mortality or incapacity, but the reality is, at your age, cognitive decline can happen suddenly. One day you're fine. The next day, you can't remember conversations or make sound decisions. It's much better to put safeguards in place now while you're still competent, rather than waiting until there's a crisis. That was it. That was the moment I understood fully what was happening. He was already questioning my competence, already suggesting that my refusal to follow his advice was evidence of poor judgment, already laying groundwork for declaring me mentally unfit. I stood up. Gentlemen, this conversation is over. Mr. Blackwell, you're not my attorney and never will be. Derek, I appreciate your concern, but I don't need your help managing my affairs. I need you both to leave my house, now. They left, but Derek slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I stood in my foyer, shaking with anger and a growing sense of dread, knowing that this wasn't over, that I'd just made myself a target, that refusing their help was going to have consequences. I called Margaret Chen that same afternoon. I told her everything, the sudden influx of family visits, the questions about my assets, Derek showing up with an elder law attorney, the pressure to set up trusts and powers of attorney with family members in control. Margaret listened carefully, and when I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Rosalind, she finally said, her voice serious, I think your family is setting you up. What you're describing sounds like the early stages of a guardianship scheme. They're building a narrative that you're declining mentally, that you need help managing your affairs. If they can establish that narrative with enough people, with doctors and lawyers and witnesses, they can petition the court to have a guardian appointed. And once that happens, you lose all control. The guardian makes every decision for you, where you live, how your money is spent, who you can see, what medical care you receive. You essentially become a non-person legally. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? I'm not incompetent. I'm managing fine on my own. That may not matter, Margaret said grimly. Guardianship proceedings are designed to protect vulnerable elderly people, which is good in principle, but they're also open to abuse. All it takes is a couple of doctors willing to say, you show signs of cognitive decline, some family members testifying that they're concerned, some evidence of questionable decisions or behavior. Judges often err on the side of caution, appointing guardians even in borderline cases because they don't want to risk leaving someone vulnerable without protection. It's very hard to defend against and even harder to get out of once it's in place. What do I do? We get ahead of it, Margaret said. We document your competency thoroughly with independent medical evaluations. We make sure your estate planning is ironclad and doesn't give anyone grounds to claim you made decisions while impaired. We watch for any further attempts to manipulate or exploit you, and we prepare for the possibility that they'll file a guardianship petition anyway. If they do, we'll be ready to fight it. That conversation changed everything. I understood now that this wasn't just annoying family pressure. This was a coordinated attack on my autonomy, my rights, my freedom. My own family was plotting to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of everything I owned. The house worth millions, the retirement accounts, the investments, everything Gerald and I had built over a lifetime of work. They wanted it, and they were willing to destroy me to get it. Over the next few months, the family campaign intensified in ways both obvious and subtle. Patricia started insisting on accompanying me to doctor's appointments, claiming she was worried about me driving, worried I might forget important information the doctor told me. I refused at first, but she was relentless, showing up at my house on appointment days, calling the doctor's office to say she was my niece and she'd be attending the appointment with me to take notes. Finally, I gave in, thinking it wasn't worth the argument. That was a mistake. What I didn't know was that Patricia was having private conversations with my doctors, expressing concerns about my memory, my decision-making, my mental state. She was creating a record with my healthcare providers of supposed cognitive decline, planting seeds of doubt about my competency. Things started disappearing from my house. Small things at first, things I might not notice right away. A piece of jewelry that Gerald had given me for our 20th anniversary. An emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Some silver candlesticks that were family heirlooms. A first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird from my book collection. When I noticed they were gone and mentioned it to Patricia during one of her visits, she looked at me with exaggerated concern. Are you sure they're gone, Aunt Rosalind? Or could you have moved them and forgotten? You know, that happens sometimes as we get older. Memory isn't what it used to be. I didn't move them, I said firmly. They were taken. Patricia exchanged a look with Derek, who'd also stopped by that day. Aunt Rosalind, maybe we should help you look for them. I'm sure they're here somewhere. You probably just put them away and forgot where. They made a show of helping me search, going through closets and drawers, all while commenting on how cluttered the house was, how hard it must be to keep track of things, how maybe I needed to downsize to somewhere smaller where there would be less to manage. All of it was performative, building their case that I was forgetful, confused, unable to manage my own household. But I knew those items hadn't been misplaced. I knew exactly where they should have been, and they were gone. Someone had taken them, and the most likely suspects were the family members who'd been in my house repeatedly over the past few months. They were stealing from me, then using my confusion about where the items had gone as evidence of cognitive decline. I started documenting everything. I kept a detailed log of every family visit, every item that went missing, every strange comment or interaction. I installed security cameras around my house, hidden ones that they wouldn't notice, capturing who came and went and what they did while they were here. Margaret had suggested this, and it turned out to be one of the smartest decisions I made. The footage was revealing and damning. I caught Patricia pocketing small, valuable items from my shelves. I caught Derek going through my desk drawers when he thought I was busy in another room. I caught multiple family members taking photos of artwork and antiques, presumably to assess their value. All of this while pretending to be concerned relatives, just checking on dear old Aunt Rosalind. But what really opened my eyes was footage from a day when I'd gone to the library to volunteer. I came home to find my front door unlocked, which was strange because I always locked it. I checked the security footage from that day and discovered that Derek and Patricia had used a key they must have copied during one of their visits to let themselves into my house while I was gone. They'd spent 2 hours going through my files, photographing financial documents, opening drawers and cabinets, essentially cataloging everything I owned. The violation of that, the invasion of my privacy and my home, it made me physically ill. And then I caught something that chilled me to my core. They were in my living room, and I'd left a voice-activated recorder running because Margaret had suggested I document any conversations that happened in my home. I heard them talking, plotting, strategizing. We need to move faster, Derek's voice said. She's not going to voluntarily give us power of attorney or agree to any of this. We need to go straight to guardianship. We don't have enough yet, Patricia responded. The doctor visits haven't yielded enough documentation. We need more evidence of incompetency. Then we create it, Derek said. We document every little mistake. Every time she forgets something minor, every odd decision. We talk to more doctors, get more people concerned. And if that's not enough, we get creative. There are ways to make someone seem confused, incompetent. What do you mean? Medication interactions can cause confusion in elderly people. If we can get access to her medications, add something that would interact poorly, it could create symptoms that look like dementia. Or we could start changing things around the house, moving items, then ask her about them to create confusion. Gaslighting, basically. Make her doubt her own memory. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's risky. If anyone found out, who's going to find out? She's 80 years old, living alone. Nobody's going to question it if she starts showing signs of cognitive decline. They'll just think it's natural aging. And once we have her declared incompetent, we can put her somewhere where she can't cause problems, sell the house, access the accounts, and split everything according to the plan. What about Margaret Chen? She's going to fight this. Let her try. We'll have multiple doctors, multiple family members testifying. One attorney can't overcome that much evidence. And once the guardianship is in place, she won't have standing to represent Rosalind anymore. The guardian will be in control of legal decisions too. I listened to this recording dozens of times, each time feeling fresh waves of betrayal and fury. My own family, my own blood relatives, were plotting not just to steal from me, but to have me declared mentally incompetent, to potentially drug me to create symptoms of dementia, to gaslight me into doubting my own mind. This wasn't just greed. This was evil. I called Margaret immediately and played her the recording. Her response was immediate and decisive. We need to act now. File for a restraining order against Derek, Patricia, and anyone else involved in this scheme. Get this recording to the police for potential criminal investigation, and prepare for them to file a guardianship petition, because they will. They're too far into this to back out now. Within days, Margaret had filed for a restraining order against Derek, Patricia, and 5 other family members who'd been most active in the campaign against me. The petition cited harassment, attempted exploitation of an elderly person, theft of property, trespassing, and conspiracy to commit fraud. It included the security footage, the audio recordings, documentation of the missing items, everything we'd gathered over the past few months. The temporary restraining order was granted immediately, requiring all named family members to stay at least 500 feet away from me and my property, with a hearing scheduled for 2 weeks later to determine if it should be made permanent. The response was explosive. Derek hired Howard Blackwell, the same elder law attorney he'd brought to my house months earlier, and they filed an emergency guardianship petition within 48 hours of being served with the restraining order. They claimed that my filing of the restraining order was proof of paranoia and poor judgment, evidence that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs and making rational decisions. About my own safety and relationships, they portrayed themselves as concerned. Family members being attacked by a confused elderly woman who was being manipulated by a predatory attorney. The petition for guardianship was 50 pages long and devastating in its portrayal of me. It included affidavits from 2 doctors, one of whom was my own primary care physician, Dr. Raymond Porter, stating that he had concerns about my cognitive function based on reports from family members and some minor issues he'd observed during routine appointments. The affidavit made it sound like Dr. Porter believed I was seriously impaired, which wasn't at all consistent with what he'd ever said to me directly. The second affidavit was from a Dr. Marcus Webb, a geriatric psychiatrist, who claimed to have evaluated me and found significant evidence of cognitive decline, poor judgment, paranoid thinking, and inability to manage my own affairs. The problem was, I'd never met Dr. Marcus Webb. I'd never been evaluated by him. I'd never even heard his name before I saw it on that affidavit. The entire thing was fabricated, a complete fraud. The petition also included statements from Derek, Patricia, and 6 other family members, all expressing deep concern about my mental state. They cited specific examples of concerning behavior, forgetting conversations we'd had, repeating the same stories multiple times, getting confused about dates and times, making poor financial decisions, neglecting my health and my home, showing signs of paranoia by accusing them of theft when they'd only been trying to help. Every single example was either a distortion of truth, taken wildly out of context, or an outright lie. but on paper, compiled into a legal petition. It painted a damning picture of an elderly woman in serious cognitive decline who desperately needed a guardian to protect her from herself and from people who might take advantage of her vulnerable state. The hearing on both the restraining order and the guardianship petition was set for the same day, 6 weeks out. 6 weeks that felt like both an eternity and no time at all. 6 weeks to prepare for the fight of my life. Those 6 weeks between when the guardianship petition was filed and when the hearing was scheduled were the longest and most terrifying of my entire 80 years of life. Every morning I woke up with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, knowing that my freedom, my autonomy, my very identity as a competent adult hung in the balance. My family had declared war on me, and the battlefield was a courtroom where my mind itself would be on trial. Margaret Chen became my lifeline during those weeks. She worked around the clock preparing our defense, building a case so strong that no judge could possibly rule against me. But she was also honest about the challenges we faced. Guardianship cases are notoriously difficult to defend against because they're designed with the best intentions to protect vulnerable elderly people who genuinely can't care for themselves. The problem is that same well-intentioned system can be weaponized by greedy family members against elderly people who are perfectly capable but happen to have assets worth stealing. The burden of proof is low, Margaret explained to me during one of our many strategy sessions in her office. Derek and his attorney don't have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that you're incompetent. They don't even have to prove it by clear and convincing evidence. In Georgia, they just have to show by a preponderance of the evidence, which means more likely than not, that you're unable to manage your affairs. That's a very low bar, Rosalind, and judges tend to err on the side of caution. They'd rather appoint a guardian who might not be strictly necessary than risk leaving someone vulnerable without protection. But I'm not vulnerable, I protested. I manage everything perfectly well. I pay my bills on time, keep my house maintained, make sound financial decisions, maintain my health. What more do I need to prove? That's what we're going to show, Margaret said. But we need to be prepared for the fact that they're going to attack not just your competency but your credibility. They're going to paint you as paranoid, as being manipulated by me, as someone whose judgment has been compromised by age and isolation. We need to be ready for all of it. The first thing we did was get me comprehensive medical evaluations from multiple independent specialists, doctors who had no connection to my family and no financial interest in the outcome. Margaret referred me to Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, a neurologist at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta who specialized in geriatric cognitive assessment and had testified as an expert witness in dozens of guardianship cases. I drove to Atlanta on a Monday morning in early June 2019 and spent an entire day at the hospital undergoing the most thorough battery of cognitive tests I'd ever experienced. Dr. Okonkwo was in her mid-50s, a Nigerian immigrant who'd come to the United States for medical school and stayed, building a distinguished career in neurology. She was professional, thorough, and completely objective, treating me neither like a confused elderly woman nor like someone she was trying to help win a case, but simply as a patient who needed accurate assessment. The testing was exhausting. We started at 8 in the morning and didn't finish until after 5. Memory tests where I had to recall lists of words immediately after hearing them, then again after a delay of 20 minutes. Sequences of numbers I had to repeat forward and backward. Stories I had to listen to and then retell in as much detail as possible. Problem-solving tasks where I had to figure out patterns and sequences of shapes and numbers. Verbal fluency tests where I had to name as many animals as I could in 1 minute, then as many words starting with the letter F as I could in another minute. Executive function tests where I had to plan routes through mazes, sort cards according to changing rules, inhibit automatic responses to do the opposite of what my brain wanted to do. There were tests of my visual spatial skills, having me copy complex geometric figures and then draw them again from memory. Tests of my processing speed, seeing how quickly I could match symbols to numbers or scan a page for target letters. Tests of my language abilities, naming objects from pictures, following complex verbal commands, understanding the meanings of words and phrases. Questions about current events to assess whether I was oriented to time and place and engaged with the world around me. Questions about my personal history to assess long-term autobiographical memory. Dr. Okonkwo also did a complete neurological examination, testing my reflexes, my coordination, my balance, my sensory perception, my muscle strength. She looked in my eyes with lights, had me walk heel to toe in a straight line, tested whether I could feel light touches and pinpricks on different parts of my body, watched how I moved and gestured and held myself, and she ordered an MRI of my brain, which I had done that same afternoon in a different part of the hospital. I'd never had an MRI before, and lying in that narrow tube, while it clanked and buzzed around me for 45 minutes was claustrophobic and unsettling. But I did it, stayed as still as possible, focused on breathing slowly and evenly, reminding myself that this scan might save my freedom. Dr. Okonkwo told me the results would take about 2 weeks, time for her to score all the tests, review the MRI with a radiologist, and write a comprehensive report. Those 2 weeks of waiting were agonizing. What if the test showed something wrong? What if there was early dementia I didn't know about? What if my family's claims had some basis in reality and I was the one who was wrong about my own mental state? The doubt crept in during sleepless nights, whispering that maybe I was too old to be living alone. Maybe I did need help. Maybe they were right. But then I'd remind myself of the truth. I managed my own finances flawlessly, balanced my checkbook to the penny every month, paid all bills on time, made sound investment decisions. I maintained my home, scheduled and kept all maintenance appointments, dealt with contractors and service providers competently. I drove safely, never had accidents or tickets, passed my license renewal tests without issues. I volunteered reliably at the library, showing up on time, performing my duties well, engaging meaningfully with the people I helped. I maintained friendships, had an active social life, participated in book club and garden club and community events. I cooked my own meals, managed my own medications, took care of my own health. Every objective measure showed I was functioning at a high level for someone of any age, let alone 80. The doubt would recede, replaced by anger. How dare they make me question myself? How dare they use my age as a weapon against me? How dare they try to steal not just my property but my very selfhood? My right to be recognized as a competent adult capable of making my own decisions? While we waited for Dr. Okonkwo's results, Margaret arranged for me to see 2 additional specialists. Dr. Robert Martinez was a psychiatrist who specialized in geriatric mental health, someone who could assess whether I had depression, anxiety, or any other mental health condition that might impair my judgment. We met at his office in Savannah for a 2-hour evaluation, where he asked me detailed questions about my mood, my emotions, my thoughts, my behaviors, my history. Had I been feeling sad or hopeless? No, I was actually quite content with my life before my family started this campaign against me. Had I lost interest in activities I used to enjoy? No, I still looked forward to book club and volunteering and tending my garden. Had my sleep changed? Only in that I was sleeping less now due to the stress of the guardianship proceedings, which was a normal response to a stressful situation. Had my appetite changed? Same answer, some stress-related decrease, but nothing pathological. Had I had thoughts of hurting myself or others? Absolutely not. Did I hear voices or see things that weren't there? No. Did I have paranoid thoughts? Well, that was a complicated question, wasn't it? Was it paranoid to think people were plotting against me when they actually were plotting against me? Dr. Martinez smiled at that and made a note. He gave me several standardized questionnaires to fill out, depression and anxiety scales that measured symptoms based on frequency and severity. He asked about my history, about Gerald's death and how I'd coped with that grief, about my childhood and my life and my relationships. He was gentle, non-judgmental, thorough. At the end of the session, he told me his preliminary impression was that I showed no signs of any mental health condition that would impair my capacity to manage my own affairs. You're dealing with a stressful situation in an entirely appropriate way, he said. You're experiencing some situational anxiety and anger, which makes perfect sense given what your family is doing to you. But you're not depressed, not psychotic, not paranoid in any clinical sense. Your emotional responses are proportionate to the actual threats you're facing. That's mental health, not mental illness. The third specialist was Dr. Jennifer Wu, a geriatrician who did a complete physical examination and reviewed my entire medical history. She looked at my medications, of which I took only 3, a low-dose blood pressure medication, a statin for cholesterol, and a daily aspirin, all standard preventive medications for someone my age, all prescribed by my primary care physician. all taken exactly as directed. Dr. Wu checked my vital signs, listened to my heart and lungs, examined my abdomen, tested my joint flexibility and muscle strength, assessed my gait and balance. You're in excellent health for your age, she told me. Your blood pressure is well controlled. Your cholesterol is good. You have no signs of diabetes or kidney disease or liver problems. Your cognitive function appears sharp from my brief observations. You move well, have good balance, don't seem to have any physical impairments that would prevent you from living independently. I see no medical reason why you couldn't continue managing your own affairs for many years to come. All 3 doctors' reports came back within the same week. About 10 days before the hearing, Dr. Okonkwo's neuropsychological evaluation was 23 pages long and extraordinarily detailed. She'd compared my performance on every test to normative data for people my age and education level. The results were unambiguous. My cognitive function was not just normal, but actually above average. For my age across every domain tested, my memory, both immediate and delayed, scored in the 85th percentile for my age group. My executive function and problem-solving abilities scored in the 90th percentile. My language skills were in the 95th percentile. My processing speed was age-appropriate, showing the normal slowing that happens with age, but no pathological decline. My visual spatial abilities were strong. The MRI showed some age-related changes in white matter, which is completely normal and expected, but no signs of stroke, no brain atrophy, no plaques or tangles or any structural abnormalities that would suggest dementia. Dr. Okonkwo's conclusion was definitive. Mrs. Thornwood demonstrates cognitive function well within normal limits for her age and education level. Her performance across all domains of cognitive assessment was strong, with many scores above the 50th percentile and several in superior ranges. There is no evidence of dementia, mild cognitive impairment, or any other neurological condition that would affect her ability to manage her own affairs. Mrs. Thornwood shows excellent orientation to time and place, intact judgment and reasoning, good insight into her situation, and the cognitive capacity to make informed decisions about her life, her health, and her finances. She is fully competent to manage her own affairs. Dr. Martinez's psychiatric evaluation reached similar conclusions. He found no evidence of depression, anxiety disorders, psychotic disorders, or any other mental health condition that would impair my decision-making capacity. Mrs. Thornwood's emotional responses to her current situation are entirely appropriate and proportionate to the actual stressors she faces. Her concern about her family's actions is reality-based, not paranoid. Her affect is appropriate, her thought processes are logical and organized, and her judgment is sound. She demonstrates full capacity to make decisions about her own life and affairs. Dr. Wu's medical assessment confirmed that I had no physical health problems that would prevent me from living independently or managing my own affairs. Mrs. Thornwood is in excellent health for an 80-year-old woman. She has well-controlled hypertension and hyperlipidemia, both managed with appropriate medications. She has no mobility issues, no falls history, no chronic pain, no sensory impairments that would affect her safety or independence. She is fully capable of self-care and independent living. Armed with these 3 comprehensive evaluations from independent, highly credentialed specialists, Margaret felt confident about our medical evidence, but she knew the other side would attack these evaluations, would claim I'd been coached or that the doctors were biased because I'd hired them. So she decided to go on offense. She subpoenaed my primary care physician, Dr. Raymond Porter, for a deposition. Dr. Porter was the one who'd signed an affidavit for Derek's guardianship petition expressing concerns about my cognitive function. Margaret wanted to know exactly what he'd observed that concerned him, what basis he had for those concerns, and whether his affidavit accurately represented his professional opinion. The deposition took place in Margaret's conference room on a Tuesday afternoon. Dr. Porter showed up looking uncomfortable, accompanied by an attorney from his medical practice's legal department. He was a man in his early 60s who'd been my doctor for about 8 years since my previous primary care physician had retired. I'd always found him competent, but not particularly warm or engaged. He saw me for 15 minutes twice a year for routine checkups and didn't seem to have much interest in me beyond checking boxes on preventive care guidelines. Margaret started gently, asking Dr. Porter about his credentials. his experience treating elderly patients, his familiarity with dementia and cognitive impairment. Then she asked him about his treatment of me specifically. How long have you been Mrs. Thornwood's physician? Since 2011, so about 8 years. And how often do you see her? Twice a year for routine preventive care visits, plus occasionally if she has acute issues like a cold or minor injury. In those 8 years of treating her, have you ever diagnosed her with dementia or any other cognitive impairment? No. Have you ever referred her to a neurologist or psychiatrist for evaluation of potential cognitive problems? No. Have you ever documented concerns about her cognitive function in her medical records prior to 2019? Dr. Porter hesitated. No, not formally documented. But you signed an affidavit stating that you had concerns about her cognitive function based on your observations and reports from family members. Can you explain the basis for those concerns? Well, Mrs. Thornwood's niece, Patricia Morrison, came to speak with me after one of Mrs. Thornwood's appointments. She expressed concerns that Mrs. Thornwood was forgetting conversations, repeating herself, showing signs of confusion. She asked if I'd noticed any issues. And had you? Another hesitation. Not significant issues, no. But Mrs. Morrison seemed very concerned, and I thought it was worth noting. Did you do any cognitive testing to assess whether Mrs. Thornwood actually had memory or cognitive problems? No, she refused. Did you offer to do cognitive testing? Not specifically, no. Margaret produced a document. This is the affidavit you signed for the guardianship petition. Let me read you a portion. In my professional opinion as Mrs. Thornwood's treating physician, I have observed concerning signs of cognitive decline, including memory deficits, confusion, and impaired judgment. Based on my medical observations and reports from family members, I believe Mrs. Thornwood may lack the capacity to manage her own affairs and would benefit from a guardian to ensure her safety and well-being. Did you write this affidavit? No, it was written by Mr. Blackwell's office. I just signed it. Did you read it carefully before signing? Yes, I read it. And is it an accurate representation of your professional opinion about Mrs. Thornwood's cognitive state? Dr. Porter looked deeply uncomfortable. His attorney leaned in and whispered something to him. I think the wording is stronger than I intended. I was expressing that there might be cause for concern based on what the family reported, not that I had definitively observed serious cognitive impairment. But this affidavit states that you have observed concerning signs of cognitive decline. Is that true? I've observed some minor things that could potentially be concerning in the context of family reports. What specifically have you observed in your examination of Mrs. Thornwood that suggests cognitive decline? Well, she sometimes asks me to repeat information about her medications or treatment recommendations. Do your other elderly patients ever ask you to repeat information? Yes, often. Is asking a doctor to repeat complex medical information a sign of cognitive impairment or just a normal request for clarification? It could be either. Has Mrs. Thornwood ever failed to understand information after you repeated it? No. Has she ever forgotten to take her medications or missed appointments? No. Has she ever seemed confused about where she was or what year it was? No. Has she ever given you any indication that she's not managing her daily life successfully? No. Margaret let that sit for a moment. Dr. Porter, based on your actual medical observations of Mrs. Thornwood, over 8 years of treating her, do you have a professional medical opinion that she suffers from dementia or significant cognitive impairment? Dr. Porter's attorney whispered to him again. He cleared his throat. Based solely on my own observations, no. But family members are often the first to notice changes, so I thought their concerns were worth taking seriously. Did you verify those concerns with any medical testing? No. Did you review Mrs. Thornwood's financial records to see if she was managing her money poorly? No, I'm her doctor, not her accountant. Did you visit her home to see if it was being neglected or was unsafe? No. Did you do anything to independently verify whether the family's concerns were based on actual cognitive impairment or might have other motivations? I trusted that family members had her best interests at heart. Margaret produced another document. This is a comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation of Mrs. Thornwood, conducted by Dr. Sarah Okonkwo at Emory University Hospital 3 weeks ago. Are you familiar with Dr. Okonkwo's work? I've heard of her, yes. Would you consider her a credible expert in geriatric cognitive assessment? Yes. Her evaluation found that Mrs. Thornwood's cognitive function is well above average for her age, with no evidence of dementia or cognitive impairment. Does that surprise you? No, I suppose it doesn't surprise me based on my own limited observations. So your affidavit, expressing concerns about her cognitive decline, was based not on your own medical observations, but primarily on reports from family members who, as we now know from other evidence, had financial motivations to have her declared incompetent? Dr. Porter's attorney objected, but the damage was done. Margaret had gotten him to admit that his concerns weren't based on his own medical observations, that he'd signed an affidavit that overstated those concerns, and that he'd taken family members' reports at face value without independently verifying them. But the second doctor's affidavit was an even bigger problem. Dr. Marcus Webb had signed a detailed evaluation claiming he'd examined me and found significant cognitive impairment. Margaret had been trying to track him down for weeks to serve him with a subpoena for a deposition, but she kept hitting dead ends. The address listed for him in Georgia medical licensing databases turned out to be a UPS store mailbox. The phone number was disconnected. He didn't seem to have an active practice anywhere in Georgia. So Margaret hired a private investigator, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, who specialized in locating people who didn't want to be found. It took Carmen less than a week to find Dr. Marcus Webb. He was living in a condo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, not practicing medicine because his Georgia medical license had been suspended 2 years earlier, and his Florida license had been revoked a year before that. The reason for the license suspensions? Dr. Webb had been caught signing disability evaluation forms for patients he'd never actually examined, essentially selling his medical opinion to anyone willing to pay him. He'd done it dozens of times before getting caught, earning thousands of dollars by rubber stamping medical evaluations that helped people fraudulently collect disability benefits. After his licenses were suspended, he'd apparently continued the same scam on a smaller scale, signing affidavits and evaluations for cash without actually seeing patients. Margaret flew to Florida and showed up at Dr. Webb's condo with a process, server, and a video camera. The encounter was brief but devastating to Derek's case. Dr. Webb initially tried to claim he didn't know what she was talking about, but when confronted with a copy of his own affidavit about me, he fell apart. "Look, I just signed what they asked me to sign," he said, his voice defensive. "They paid me $5,000. I needed the money. I didn't think it would be a big deal. You signed a legal document stating you'd evaluated Mrs. Rosalind Thornwood and found her cognitively impaired. Did you ever meet her? No. Did you ever examine her? No. Did you review any medical records or test results? They gave me some notes, family observations or something. I just read those and signed the form they prepared. So you committed fraud, falsified a medical evaluation, and participated in a scheme to have an elderly woman declared incompetent based on no actual examination." Dr. Webb's face went pale. "I want a lawyer." Margaret smiled. "That's probably a good idea." She had the entire encounter on video. She also had Dr. Webb's signed and notarized affidavit admitting he'd never examined me, admitting he'd been paid to sign the evaluation, admitting the whole thing was fraudulent. It was a nuclear bomb that would blow up Derek's case. But Margaret wasn't done. She'd also hired Carmen Rodriguez to investigate what had happened to the items that had disappeared from my house. The security camera footage had shown Derek and Patricia taking things, but we needed to prove they'd actually stolen them, not just borrowed them temporarily. Carmen tracked down the silver candlesticks. They were sitting on Derek's dining room table in his house in Atlanta, clearly visible through his front window. She photographed them from multiple angles with date and timestamps, showing they'd been in his possession for months. The candlesticks were distinctive, antique Georgian silver with my family initials engraved on them. There was no way Derek could claim they were his. The emerald ring was harder to track down, but Carmen eventually found a pawnshop transaction in Augusta, Georgia, dated 6 months earlier. The transaction record included a copy of the seller's driver's license. It was Derek's license. He'd pawned my ring for $2,000. Carmen obtained copies of the transaction, records and photographs of the ring from the pawnshop's files. I was able to identify it definitively as mine based on unique characteristics: a small chip in one of the emeralds, an inscription inside the band with Gerald's and my initials and wedding date. The first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird was even more satisfying to locate. Patricia had apparently not stolen it to keep, but to sell. She'd listed it for sale on an online rare book marketplace, and Carmen found the listing complete with photographs. The book was clearly identifiable as mine based on an inscription on the flyleaf, "To Rosalind, with all my love on our 40th anniversary, Gerald." The inscription was visible in Patricia's listing photos. She was asking $8,000 for it. Carmen contacted the rare book dealer who was selling it on consignment for Patricia, posed as a potential buyer, and got the dealer to confirm when and how he'd acquired it. He had records showing Patricia had brought it to him 4 months earlier and that she'd signed consignment papers using her real name. When Margaret contacted him with legal demands for the book's return as stolen property, the dealer cooperated immediately, not wanting to be implicated in receiving stolen goods. So we had clear evidence of theft, video of Derek and Patricia taking items from my house, proof that Derek had pawned my ring, proof that he was displaying my candlesticks in his home, proof that Patricia had tried to sell my book. This wasn't absent-minded borrowing. This was deliberate theft, stealing family heirlooms and valuable items and either keeping them or selling them for personal profit. But the most damning evidence came from the audio recordings I'd made in my own home. Georgia is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record conversations you're part of or that take place in your own home without the other party's knowledge or consent. I'd set up voice-activated recorders in several rooms after Margaret suggested it, and those recorders had captured numerous conversations between Derek, Patricia, and other family members as they plotted their strategy. The most incriminating recording was the one I'd mentioned earlier, where Derek and Patricia discussed creating evidence of my incompetency, potentially using medication interactions to cause confusion, and gaslighting me by moving things around the house to make me doubt my own memory. But there were other recordings too. Conversations about how to divide up my assets once they gained control. Discussions about which nursing home to put me in that would be cheapest while still being acceptable. Debates about whether to sell the house immediately or rent it out for a while to maximize profit. One particularly chilling conversation had Derek saying, "Once we have guardianship, she's effectively neutralized. We can control every aspect of her life. If she fights it, we just medicate her into compliance. If she complains, we limit her communication. She'll be completely under our control." Patricia had responded, "What if she tries to fight the guardianship in court?" "The guardian controls her legal representation," Derek said. "We just refuse to authorize any attorney to fight on her behalf. Once guardianship is in place, she has no standing to challenge it herself. She's stuck." These recordings showed clear consciousness of guilt, clear knowledge that what they were doing was wrong, and clear intent to exploit and control me for financial gain. They also showed shocking callousness, discussing me like I was a problem to be managed rather than a human being with rights and feelings. Margaret compiled all of this evidence into a comprehensive response to the guardianship petition. She prepared exhibits, the 3 independent medical evaluations showing my competency, Dr. Porter's deposition admitting his affidavit had overstated his concerns, proof that Dr. Webb had never examined me and had committed fraud, evidence of theft, transcripts of the recorded conversations showing the conspiracy against me. She prepared witness lists, the 3 doctors who'd evaluated me, character witnesses who could testify to my competency and independence, expert witnesses on elder exploitation and guardianship abuse. She also prepared me to testify. We spent hours going over the questions she'd ask, the questions Derek's attorney Howard Blackwell would likely ask, how to answer clearly and concisely, how to stay calm and composed under hostile cross-examination. Margaret warned me that Blackwell would try to make me seem confused or emotional or irrational, that he'd ask the same questions multiple ways trying to trap me in inconsistencies, that he'd bring up minor mistakes or memory lapses and try to make them seem like evidence of serious impairment. "Remember," she told me, "you don't have to justify your decisions or defend your choices. You just have to show that you have the capacity to make decisions, even if other people might make different choices. Competency isn't about making perfect decisions. It's about having the cognitive ability to understand information, appreciate consequences, and make informed choices based on your own values and preferences." The hearing was scheduled for a sweltering day in July 2019. The Chatham County Probate Court was an old building with inadequate air conditioning, and by the time the hearing started at 10 in the morning, the courtroom was already uncomfortably warm. I wore my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to Gerald's funeral, wanting to look competent and professional. I'd had my hair done at the salon that morning, put on minimal makeup, wore my good pearl earrings. I wanted to present as exactly what I was, a put-together, capable woman who happened to be 80 years old. Derek was there with Howard Blackwell and 7 other family members, all dressed in dark colors like they were attending a funeral. My funeral, I thought bitterly, the funeral of my independence. They wore expressions of concerned piety, false sadness, performing for the judge their role as caring relatives making a painful but necessary intervention. Patricia even brought a box of tissues, dabbing at dry eyes dramatically. The judge was Evelyn Martinez, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and an expression that gave nothing away. She'd been on the bench for 15 years and had a reputation in the legal community as being thorough, fair, and extremely intelligent. She didn't suffer fools, and she didn't tolerate dishonesty. She'd handled hundreds of guardianship cases over her career and had seen every variation of family, drama, and elder exploitation. If anyone would see through Derek's scheme, it would be Judge Martinez. But I also knew she'd handled cases where elderly people genuinely needed protection, and she would take Derek's concerns seriously, regardless of his motives. She would base her decision on evidence, not emotion. Margaret and I sat at one table. Derek, Patricia, and Howard Blackwell sat at the other. The courtroom had maybe 15 people in the gallery, the other family members who'd come to testify, a court reporter, a few lawyers waiting for other cases, and a representative from the district attorney's office who was observing because of the potential criminal implications of our case. Judge Martinez called the case. In the matter of the petition for guardianship of Rosalind May Thornwood and the matter of Mrs. Thornwood's petition for permanent restraining order against Derek Hansen and others. These cases are consolidated for today's hearing. Mr. Blackwell, you filed the guardianship petition. You may present your case first. Howard Blackwell stood, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He was in his late 40s, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of practiced confidence that comes from years of winning cases. He'd built his career on guardianship cases, representing petitioners who wanted to take control of elderly relatives' affairs. He made good money doing it because guardians had to pay attorney fees out of the ward's estate, so he had a financial incentive to succeed in getting guardianships established. Thank you, Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and sympathetic. This is a difficult case for everyone involved. The Hansen family loves their Aunt Rosalind deeply. She's been a beloved member of their family for decades, but they're watching her decline, and it breaks their hearts. They're here today not because they want control of her assets, but because they want to protect her from herself and from people who might take advantage of her vulnerable state. He painted a picture of a family in crisis, watching a cherished, elderly relative slip into confusion and poor judgment while refusing help. He talked about Derek's and Patricia's concerns, their attempts to gently suggest safer living situations, their efforts to help me manage my affairs. He portrayed them as patient, loving family members, driven to this painful step only after exhausting all other options. Then he called his first witness, Patricia Morrison. Patricia took the stand, dressed in a somber gray dress, clutching a tissue in one hand. She looked at me with an expression of sad concern that was absolutely masterful in its falseness. She testified that she'd been visiting me regularly for over a year, and during that time, she'd observed troubling changes in my behavior and cognitive function. Can you give specific examples? Blackwell asked. Well, Aunt Rosalind would tell me the same story multiple times in one visit. Not remembering she'd already told it to me, she'd forget conversations we'd had just days earlier. She'd get confused about what day it was or what plans we'd made. She'd accuse me and other family members of taking things from her house when really she'd just misplaced them and forgotten where she'd put them. Were you concerned about her safety living alone in that large house? Very concerned. The house wasn't being maintained properly. There were repairs that needed to be done that she wasn't taking care of. I worried about her falling on the stairs or having a medical emergency with no one there to help her. Did you try to discuss these concerns with her? Yes, many times. I suggested she might be happier in a smaller place, maybe a senior living community where there would be activities and medical care available. but she became very defensive and angry whenever I brought it up. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong, because Aunt Rosalind used to be such a reasonable person. Her inability to have a rational conversation about her living situation was itself evidence of impaired judgment. It was all lies, of course, lies mixed with just enough truth to be believable. Yes, Patricia had visited regularly, but not out of love or concern. Yes, she'd suggested I sell my house and move, but not for my safety. Yes, I'd gotten angry, but not because of impaired judgment, but because I'd recognized her ulterior motives. But the way she told it, framed in concern and sadness, it sounded plausible. It sounded like a loving niece trying to help a declining aunt. Margaret cross-examined her carefully. Ms. Morrison, you testified that Mrs. Thornwood would tell the same story multiple times. Can you give a specific example of a story she repeated? Patricia hesitated. Well, there were several. Stories about her late husband, about her career, things like that. But can you give me one specific story you remember her repeating multiple times in the same visit? I don't recall the exact story, but it happened many times. You also testified that she'd forget conversations you'd had. Can you give me a specific example of a conversation she forgot? There were many instances. I don't remember all the details, so you can't actually cite a single, specific example of either of these concerning behaviors. It's hard to remember every specific instance, but the pattern was clear. Ms. Morrison, how old are you? 47. Have you ever repeated a story to someone, forgetting you'd already told them? I suppose so, occasionally. Have you ever forgotten a conversation you had with someone? Sometimes, yes. So occasional memory lapses are normal human behavior, not necessarily signs of dementia. But Aunt Rosalind's lapses were more frequent and more concerning. Based on what expertise? Are you a medical doctor? No. A neurologist or psychiatrist? No. Have you had any training in assessing cognitive function or diagnosing dementia? No, but family members see things doctors might miss. Margaret paused. Ms. Morrison, let me show you some photographs. She handed Patricia several printed photos. Do you recognize these silver candlesticks? Patricia's face went slightly pale. They look like candlesticks. They're photographed in a dining room at 2847 Oakmont Drive in Atlanta. That's your brother Derek's address, isn't it? I think so. And these candlesticks belong to Mrs. Thornwood, don't they? They have her family initials engraved on them. I don't know how they got there. Let me show you another photograph. Margaret showed her a screenshot from my security camera footage. This is you in Mrs. Thornwood's library on March 15th of this year. You're holding these same candlesticks and putting them in your purse. Do you see that? Patricia's attorney tried to object, but Judge Martinez allowed the question. Patricia stammered, I thought I'd polish them for her. By taking them to your brother's house and leaving them there for 4 months, I meant to return them. Ms. Morrison, you also tried to sell a first edition book belonging to Mrs. Thornwood on consignment through a rare book dealer, didn't you? I don't. That was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding where you took a book with an inscription from Mrs. Thornwood's deceased husband and tried to sell it for $8,000? Patricia was flustered now, the concerned niece act crumbling. You're twisting things. We were trying to help her downsize without her knowledge or consent by taking valuable items and selling or keeping them. That's not helping someone downsize. That's theft, isn't it? Objection. Howard Blackwell was on his feet. Your Honor, this cross-examination is harassing the witness and is not relevant to the question of Mrs. Thornwood's competency. On the contrary, Your Honor, Margaret responded. It goes directly to the credibility of the witness and the motives behind this guardianship petition. If Ms. Morrison has been stealing from Mrs. Thornwood, her claims of concern for Mrs. Thornwood's well-being are suspect. Judge Martinez considered. I'll allow it. Objection overruled. Margaret continued pressing Patricia about the thefts, about the recorded conversations, about her real motivations. By the time Patricia stepped down from the witness stand, she was visibly shaken, her credibility seriously damaged. Derek testified next. He presented himself as the concerned nephew who'd watched his beloved aunt decline, who'd tried to help her only to be accused of terrible things, who was heartbroken that she'd turned against family members who only wanted to protect her. He testified about conversations where I'd supposedly been confused, decisions I'd supposedly made that showed poor judgment, deterioration he'd supposedly observed. Margaret's cross-examination of Derek was even more devastating than her questioning of Patricia. She confronted him with the evidence of theft, with the pawnshop records showing he'd sold my ring, with the photographs of my candlesticks in his house. She played portions of the audio, recordings where he discussed creating evidence of my incompetency, where he talked about medicating me into compliance once he had control, where he and Patricia discussed dividing up my assets. The courtroom went completely silent as those recordings played. Derek's voice caught on tape saying once we have guardianship, she's effectively neutralized. We can control every aspect of her life. Patricia's voice asking what they'd do if I fought back. Derek's voice, cold and calculating. The guardian controls her legal representation. We just refuse to authorize any attorney to fight on her behalf. Judge Martinez's expression grew harder as she listened. Derek tried to explain the recordings away, claiming they were taken out of context, that he'd just been speaking hypothetically, that he'd never actually intended to do any of those things. But the recordings spoke for themselves. There was no context that made them acceptable, no explanation that would justify plotting to control and exploit an elderly relative. The final blow came when Margaret brought up Dr. Marcus Webb. Mr. Hansen, your guardianship petition includes an affidavit from Dr. Marcus Webb, stating he evaluated Mrs. Thornwood and found significant cognitive impairment. Are you familiar with that affidavit? Yes. Did you arrange for Dr. Webb to evaluate Mrs. Thornwood? Yes. I wanted an independent medical opinion. And did Dr. Webb actually evaluate Mrs. Thornwood? Derek hesitated. I believe so. You believe so? Did you arrange the appointment? Take her to see him? No, he met with her separately. When and where did this evaluation take place? I don't know the exact details. Margaret produced documents, Mr. Hansen. I have here a signed affidavit from Dr. Marcus Webb admitting that he never met Mrs. Thornwood, never evaluated her, and signed the affidavit in your guardianship petition in exchange for $5,000 you paid him. Were you aware that Dr. Webb never actually evaluated her? Derek's face went red. No. I trusted that he had. You paid him $5,000 for an evaluation without verifying he'd actually conducted it? I paid him for his professional opinion. Based on what? He never saw her, never examined her, never reviewed any medical records. You paid him $5,000 to sign a fraudulent affidavit, claiming she was incompetent. That's fraud, Mr. Hansen. Objection. Howard Blackwell was practically shouting. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Mr. Hansen relied on a medical professional's representation, a medical professional whose license has been suspended for fraud. Margaret shot back. A medical professional your client paid in cash to sign a fake evaluation. Your Honor, I have Dr. Webb's admission on video and in a signed statement. This entire guardianship petition is based on fabricated medical evidence. Judge Martinez's face was like stone. I'll review the evidence regarding Dr. Webb's affidavit. Continue your cross-examination, Ms. Chen. Margaret continued systematically destroying Derek's credibility, showing that every claim of my incompetency was either fabricated, exaggerated, or based on normal age-related changes that didn't indicate dementia. By the time Derek stepped down, he looked defeated, his scheme unraveling before the judge's eyes. Howard Blackwell tried to recover by calling Dr. Porter my primary care physician, but Dr. Porter's testimony was halting and unconvincing. He admitted he'd never diagnosed me with dementia or cognitive impairment. He admitted his concerns were based primarily on family reports, not his own observations. He admitted the affidavit he'd signed overstated his actual professional opinion. He came across as a doctor who'd signed a legal document without fully understanding its implications, lending his credibility to a case he hadn't actually investigated. Then it was our turn. Margaret called her witnesses, starting with Dr. Sarah Okonkwo. Dr. Okonkwo was impressive on the witness stand, explaining the comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation she'd conducted, the tests she'd administered, the results she'd obtained. She walked through each domain of cognitive function, showing how my performance compared to normative data for my age. She explained the MRI findings, pointing out that normal age-related brain changes didn't indicate pathology. She testified with clarity and confidence that I had no signs of dementia or cognitive impairment, that my mental function was actually above average for my age. Howard Blackwell tried to attack her credentials and her objectivity, suggesting she was biased because I'd paid her for the evaluation. But Dr. Okonkwo handled him easily. I'm paid to conduct evaluations, not to produce particular results, she said coolly. My professional reputation depends on accuracy and objectivity. If Mrs. Thornwood had shown signs of dementia, I would have reported that, regardless of who was paying for the evaluation. But she doesn't have dementia. The evidence is clear. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Wu testified similarly, confirming that I had no mental health or physical health conditions that would impair my capacity to manage my own affairs. Both came across as credible, professional, thorough. Then Margaret called character witnesses. My book club president, who testified that I was engaged and thoughtful in discussions, always prepared, never confused or forgetful. The director of the library where I volunteered, who testified that I was reliable, competent, performed my duties well. Friends who testified that I managed my own household, drove safely, paid my bills, maintained an active social life, showed no signs of cognitive decline. All of this was building a comprehensive picture of a competent, independent, high-functioning 80-year-old woman who was being targeted by greedy relatives, not an incompetent elder who needed a guardian. And then Margaret called me to testify. I took the stand feeling 80 years of life steadying me, strengthening me. I'd been through so much in my life: poverty, discrimination, miscarriages, the death of my beloved husband. I'd overcome obstacles, built a successful career, created financial security through decades of hard work. I wasn't going to let my own family steal everything I'd built. I wasn't going to let them erase me, declare me incompetent, lock me away in a nursing home while they divided up my assets. Margaret walked me through my life story. My education, my career, my marriage to Gerald, our years building the law practice together. She asked about my daily life now, how I managed my finances, maintained my home, took care of my health, engaged with my community. I answered clearly and specifically, giving concrete examples of the tasks I performed independently. Mrs. Thornwood, why do you think your family filed this guardianship petition? Because they want my money and my house. They've said so explicitly in conversations they didn't know I was recording. They're not concerned about my welfare. They're concerned about getting access to my assets. How did you feel when you discovered they were plotting against you? Betrayed, heartbroken, angry. These are people I'd helped over the years, people I'd welcomed into my home, people I'd trusted, and they were scheming to have me declared incompetent, to steal from me, to control me. It's elder abuse, plain and simple. Margaret asked me about the items that had been stolen, about discovering the thefts, about the security cameras I'd installed to protect myself. She asked about the pressure to sell my house, about Derek bringing Howard Blackwell to my home uninvited, about all the red flags I'd noticed. I answered everything calmly, specifically, painting a clear picture of a coordinated campaign against me. Then it was Howard Blackwell's turn to cross-examine me. He started by trying to establish that I was forgetful. Mrs. Thornwood, what did you have for breakfast this morning? Oatmeal with blueberries, a cup of coffee with cream, and a glass of orange juice. What about yesterday morning? The same. I eat the same breakfast every morning because I like routine and it's healthy. What about a week ago Monday? The same breakfast I have every day. So you don't specifically remember that particular breakfast. I remember that I eat the same breakfast every morning. So I know what I had that day, even if I don't have a specific episodic memory of that particular meal. That's how semantic memory works. He looked frustrated that I'd answered intelligently and moved on. You've accused my clients of stealing from you. Isn't it possible you simply misplaced these items and forgot where you put them? No. I have security camera footage showing them taking the items. I have pawn shop records showing Derek sold my ring. I have photographs showing my candlesticks in his house. These aren't misplaced items. They're stolen property. You installed security cameras in your home. Don't you think that's paranoid behavior? Not when people are actually stealing from me and plotting to have me declared incompetent. It's not paranoia when the threat is real. You recorded private conversations in your home without informing the participants. Isn't that an invasion of privacy? It's legal in Georgia to record conversations in your own home. And given what those conversations revealed, I'd say it was a wise precaution, not an invasion of privacy. He kept trying to trap me, to make me seem confused or emotional or irrational. But I stayed calm, answered clearly, didn't take the bait. Margaret had prepared me well, finally frustrated. Blackwell asked, Mrs. Thornwood, don't you think that at 80 years old, you might need some help managing your affairs? I looked directly at Judge Martinez when I answered, Your Honor, I've been managing my own affairs since I was 18 years old. I put myself through college and graduate school while working full-time. I helped build a successful law practice. I've been managing complex financial matters for over 6 decades. I've survived poverty, discrimination, loss, grief. I've adapted to enormous changes in society and technology over my 80 years. I balance my checkbook to the penny. I maintain my home. I manage my health. I volunteer regularly in my community. I have an active social life. I read voraciously. I learn new things constantly. And yes, I'm 80 years old. But being old doesn't make me incompetent. It makes me experienced. I don't need my family to manage my affairs. I need them to stop trying to steal from me. The courtroom was silent when I finished. I could see tears in some people's eyes. Even the court reporter looked moved. I stepped down from the witness stand feeling like I'd said what needed to be said, like I'd made my case clearly and forcefully. Now it was up to Judge Martinez. But the hearing wasn't quite over. Judge Martinez called for a brief recess, and when we reconvened, there was one more witness. The prosecutor from the district attorney's office, who'd been observing the proceedings, had brought additional evidence. The prosecutor from the district attorney's office stood up, and Judge Martinez acknowledged him with a nod. His name was James Caldwell, a man in his early 40s with graying hair and the kind of serious expression that comes from years of prosecuting criminals. He addressed the court with a gravity that made everyone sit up straighter. "Your Honor," he began, "my office has been monitoring this case because of the potential criminal violations involved. Based on the evidence presented today, and based on additional investigation my office has conducted over the past 3 weeks, I need to inform the court that we are opening a formal criminal investigation into Derek Hansen, Patricia Morrison, and potentially other family members for conspiracy to commit fraud, exploitation of an elderly person, theft, and perjury." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Derek and Patricia looked like they've been punched in the stomach. Howard Blackwell went pale, clearly realizing that his involvement in this scheme might bring him professional consequences as well. Caldwell continued, "We have evidence of a coordinated scheme to defraud Mrs. Thornwood of her property and her rights. We have evidence of theft of multiple items of significant value. We have evidence of a fraudulent medical affidavit purchased from a doctor whose license had been suspended for similar fraud. We have audio recordings of the conspirators discussing their plans to manipulate and control Mrs. Thornwood, to potentially use medications to create confusion, and to profit from her estate. This is not a family dispute about what is best for an elderly relative. This is elder abuse, and my office takes such crimes very seriously." He produced additional documents. "Your Honor, we have also conducted financial investigations into Derek Hansen and Patricia Morrison. Mr. Hansen has significant personal debt, over $300,000 in credit card debt, unpaid loans, and a second mortgage on his home that is underwater. Ms. Morrison has similar financial problems, including 2 bankruptcies in the past decade. Both stand to inherit substantial sums if they gain control of Mrs. Thornwood's estate. The financial motive here is clear and compelling." Judge Martinez accepted the documents and reviewed them silently for several minutes. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear people breathing. When she finally looked up, her expression was ice cold. She addressed Derek and Patricia directly. "Mr. Hansen, Ms. Morrison, I have sat on this bench for 15 years. I have handled hundreds of guardianship cases. I have seen families torn apart by these proceedings. I have seen elderly people who genuinely need protection, and I have seen elderly people who are being exploited by greedy relatives. This case is one of the most egregious examples of the latter that I have ever encountered," she continued, her voice getting harder with each word. "The evidence shows that Mrs. Thornwood is fully competent, managing her affairs successfully, and living independently without any need for a guardian. The evidence also shows that you, Mr. Hansen and Ms. Morrison, along with other family members, have engaged in a calculated scheme to have her declared incompetent, so you could gain access to her assets. You have stolen from her. You have lied about her mental state. You have fabricated medical evidence. You have plotted to control and exploit her. This is not concern for a beloved aunt. This is financial predation, pure and simple." Judge Martinez turned to Howard Blackwell. "Mr. Blackwell, you have presented fraudulent evidence to this court. Whether you knew Dr. Webb's affidavit was fabricated or simply failed to verify its authenticity, you had a professional obligation to ensure the evidence you presented was truthful. I am referring this matter to the State Bar for investigation into potential ethics violations. You may face disciplinary action up to and including disbarment." Blackwell opened his mouth to protest, but Judge Martinez cut him off with a raised hand. I am not interested in your excuses, Mr. Blackwell. Save them for the state bar investigation. Then she delivered her rulings. First, as to the guardianship petition filed by Derek Hansen, I find that the petition is entirely without merit. Mrs. Rosalind Thornwood has demonstrated, through extensive medical evaluation and credible testimony, that she is fully competent to manage her own affairs. She has no cognitive impairment, no dementia, no mental health conditions that would affect her decision-making capacity. She is living independently, managing her finances responsibly, maintaining her health, and engaging actively with her community. There is no basis whatsoever for appointing a guardian. The petition for guardianship is denied in its entirety. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost cried. But Judge Martinez wasn't finished. Second, as to Mrs. Thornwood's petition for a permanent restraining order, I find that the evidence overwhelmingly supports her claims of harassment, exploitation, and abuse by Derek Hansen, Patricia Morrison, and other family members. The temporary restraining order is made permanent. Derek Hansen, Patricia Morrison, and all other family members named in the restraining order are prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Mrs. Thornwood or her property. They are prohibited from contacting her directly or indirectly. They are prohibited from contacting her friends, her medical providers, her attorney, or anyone else in her life for the purpose of gathering information about her or attempting to interfere with her affairs. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and prosecution for contempt of court. She looked directly at Derek and Patricia. Let me be absolutely clear. You are not to go near Mrs. Thornwood. You are not to call her. You are not to email her. You are not to send messages through other family members. You are not to drive past her house. You are not to attempt any contact whatsoever. If you see her in public, you are to leave immediately. If you violate this order, you will go to jail. Do you understand? Derek and Patricia both nodded, looking shell-shocked. Judge Martinez continued, Third, I am referring this entire matter to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Prosecution. The evidence presented today shows multiple violations of Georgia criminal law, including but not limited to exploitation of an elderly person, theft by taking, conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and potentially other crimes. I am ordering that all evidence presented in this hearing, including the security camera footage, the audio recordings, the financial records, and the testimony, be turned over to the District Attorney's Office for their investigation. She paused, letting that sink in. Fourth, regarding the stolen property, I am ordering Derek Hansen to return immediately to Mrs. Thornwood. The silver candlesticks, currently in his possession, I am ordering both Derek Hansen and Patricia Morrison to make full restitution for all items stolen from Mrs. Thornwood, including the emerald ring that was pawned and the first edition book that was sold on consignment. The total value of restitution will be determined based on professional appraisal, but it appears to be in excess of $20,000. They have 30 days to make full restitution or face additional civil penalties. She looked at Howard Blackwell again. Fifth, I am sanctioning you, Mr. Blackwell, in the amount of $50,000 for presenting fraudulent evidence to this court. This sanction is payable to Mrs. Thornwood within 60 days. Additionally, you are ordered to pay all of Mrs. Thornwood's attorney fees and costs associated with defending against this baseless guardianship petition. I will review Ms. Chen's fee petition when she submits it, but I expect the total will be substantial given the amount of work required to defend against your fraudulent case. The $50,000 sanction made Blackwell look physically ill. Attorney fees in a case like this could easily run another $100,000 or more. He was looking at financial ruin, plus the potential loss of his law license. Judge Martinez concluded, Finally, I want to address something broader that this case represents. Elder exploitation is a serious and growing problem in our society. As our population ages, more and more elderly people find themselves targeted by family members, caregivers, and others who see them as sources of money rather than as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. The guardianship system, which was created to protect vulnerable people, is sometimes weaponized by predators to gain control over elderly individuals who are perfectly capable of managing their own lives. She looked directly at me. Mrs. Thornwood, you have shown remarkable strength in defending yourself against This attack on your autonomy and your rights. You did everything right. You documented the abuse, you sought legal counsel, you obtained medical evaluations, you gathered evidence. You fought back, and you won. I hope your case serves as an example to other elderly people who might be facing similar exploitation. You do not have to accept abuse from family members. You do not have to give up your independence just because you are old. You have rights, and those rights can be defended. She turned back to Derek and Patricia. And to those who would exploit elderly family members, let this case be a warning. Elder abuse is a crime. It will be investigated. It will be prosecuted. And there will be consequences, both civil and criminal. This court will not tolerate predators who target vulnerable members of our community. With that, she brought down her gavel. This hearing is concluded. The guardianship petition is denied. The restraining order is made permanent. All parties are dismissed. The courtroom slowly emptied. Derek and Patricia left quickly, not looking at me, followed by the other family members who'd come to testify against me. They knew what was coming. Criminal charges, financial ruin, possible prison time. Their scheme had not only failed, but had blown up spectacularly in their faces. Howard Blackwell gathered his papers with shaking hands, knowing his career was likely over. Between the state bar investigation and the massive financial sanctions, he was finished as an attorney. Margaret and I sat for a moment in the quiet courtroom after everyone else had left. I should have felt triumphant, victorious, elated, and I did feel those things. But I also felt profoundly sad. These were my family members, my own blood relatives. They hadn't just tried to steal my money. They'd tried to erase me as a person, to declare me incompetent, to take away my fundamental rights. The betrayal was so deep it would never fully heal. You did it, Margaret said softly, putting her hand on mine. You fought them and you won. We did it, I corrected her. I couldn't have done this without you. The criminal prosecution moved forward quickly. The district attorney's office, led by prosecutor James Caldwell, took the case seriously. Within 2 weeks of the hearing, Derek and Patricia were formally indicted by a grand jury on multiple felony counts. Derek was charged with exploitation of an elderly person, a felony in Georgia carrying up to 20 years in prison. He was charged with theft by taking 4, stealing the emerald ring and the candlesticks. He was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. He was charged with perjury for lying in sworn statements in the guardianship petition. He was charged with attempted forgery for his involvement in obtaining the fraudulent affidavit from Dr. Webb. In total, 6 felony counts and 2 misdemeanor counts. Patricia faced similar charges: exploitation of an elderly person, theft by taking for the candlesticks and the book, conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury. She had 5 felony counts and 1 misdemeanor count. 4 other family members who had participated in the scheme were charged with lesser crimes, mostly misdemeanor, conspiracy and providing false statements in the guardianship petition. They had been involved but not as central to the scheme as Derek and Patricia. Dr. Marcus Webb, the doctor who'd signed the fraudulent affidavit, was arrested in Florida and extradited to Georgia to face charges of fraud, practicing medicine without a license, and conspiracy. His prior history of similar fraud made it unlikely he'd get a lenient sentence. Howard Blackwell wasn't criminally charged, but the state bar investigation moved forward. Within 3 months, he was formally disbarred for knowingly presenting fraudulent evidence to a court and for engaging in conduct involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, and misrepresentation. His law career was over. The $50,000 sanction plus the attorney fees he owed me, which Margaret calculated at $137,000, bankrupted him. His office closed, his staff lost their jobs, and he had to sell his house to pay his debts. The criminal cases took about a year to resolve. Derek and Patricia both initially pleaded not guilty and tried to fight the charges, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. The security camera footage, the audio recordings, the financial records, the testimony from the guardianship hearing, all of it was admissible in criminal court. Their attorneys eventually advised them that going to trial would be suicidal, that they'd almost certainly be convicted on all counts and face maximum sentences. So they negotiated plea deals. Derek pleaded guilty to exploitation of an elderly person and theft, with the other charges dismissed, in exchange for his cooperation and acceptance of responsibility. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. He had to pay full restitution for everything he'd stolen, plus court costs and fees. His criminal record meant he'd likely never work in a professional capacity again. Patricia got a slightly better deal because she'd been less central to the planning and because she had young children at home. She pleaded guilty to exploitation of an elderly person and received a sentence of 3 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation. She also had to pay full restitution and was barred from ever serving as a guardian, trustee, or fiduciary for anyone else. The other family members who were charged pleaded guilty to misdemeanors and received probation, community service, and fines. None of them went to prison, but they all had criminal records. Dr. Marcus Webb pleaded guilty in Florida to fraud charges there and in Georgia to fraud and conspiracy charges here. Because of his prior history and the multiple jurisdictions involved, he received a sentence of 7 years in federal prison. His medical licenses in all states were permanently revoked. Throughout all of this, I tried to process what had happened and move forward with my life. The permanent restraining order meant I had no contact with Derek, Patricia, or the other family members who'd participated in the scheme. They were completely cut out of my life, which was both a relief and a source of sadness. I thought about the holidays we used to share, the family gatherings, the connections that were now permanently severed. But I also knew I was better off without people in my life who saw me as nothing more than a source of money. I updated my will with Margaret's help, making absolutely certain that Derek, Patricia, and anyone else who'd been involved in the guardianship scheme would receive nothing from my estate. I included a specific clause explaining why they were disinherited, stating clearly that they had attempted to exploit me and had been convicted of crimes against me. I wanted there to be no question about my intentions, no possibility that anyone could claim I forgot to include them or that my decision was the result of impaired judgment. I left most of my estate to charities that work to protect elderly people from exploitation and abuse. The house would be sold after my death, with proceeds going to the Georgia Elder Abuse Shelter, an organization that provides legal assistance and safe housing for elderly people fleeing abusive situations. My financial accounts would be divided among several organizations, the Alzheimer's Association, because even though I don't have dementia, I want to support research and care for those who do, a legal aid foundation that provides free attorneys to elderly people fighting guardianship proceedings, and a local literacy program that I'd volunteered with for years. I also made provisions for my few remaining friends who had stood by me, leaving each of them a modest bequest and a personal item to remember me by. And I left money to Margaret Chen, not as payment for her legal services, which he had already paid in full, but as a thank you for saving my life, because that's really what she'd done. Without her expertise and her willingness to fight for me, I might be in a nursing home right now, drugged into compliance. While Derek and Patricia sold my house and spent my money, I became something of a local advocate for elder rights after the case concluded. The Savannah Morning News ran a front-page story about my case, detailing how it had fought off my family's attempt to have me declared incompetent. The story resonated with a lot of people, both elderly individuals who'd faced similar situations and younger people who'd watched their own parents or grandparents be exploited by family members or caregivers. I started speaking at senior centers and community groups about how to protect yourself from financial exploitation, how to recognize the warning signs, how to fight back if you find yourself targeted. I talked about the importance of having your own attorney, someone who works for you and represents your interests, not someone your family brings in. I talked about the value of getting independent medical evaluations if your competency is questioned, about documenting everything, about not being afraid to stand up to family members who are trying to exploit you. The response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of letters and emails from elderly people and their advocates, thanking me for speaking out, sharing their own stories of exploitation or attempted exploitation, asking for advice on how to protect themselves or fight back against family members who were trying to take advantage of them. Many of their stories were heartbreaking. Children stealing from parents, grandchildren forging checks, family members isolating elderly relatives and controlling every aspect of their lives. I worked with Margaret and with prosecutors' office to help develop educational materials about elder exploitation. We created brochures and presentations explaining the warning signs, the legal protections available, and the steps to take if you suspect you're being exploited. We partnered with banks and financial institutions to train their staff to recognize signs of elder exploitation and to know how to report suspected abuse. I also worked with state legislators to strengthen Georgia's laws protecting elderly people from exploitation. The existing laws were decent but had some gaps. For example, the penalties for elder exploitation weren't as severe as they should be. The burden of proof in guardianship proceedings was too low, making it too easy for predators to get guardianships over competent elderly people. The oversight of guardians was inadequate, allowing some guardians to abuse their power without consequences. We proposed legislation to address these issues. Stronger criminal penalties for elder exploitation, making it a more serious felony with mandatory minimum sentences. Higher standards of proof for guardianship proceedings, requiring clear and convincing evidence rather than just preponderance of evidence. Better oversight of guardians, with required regular reporting to the court and investigation of any complaints. Criminal background checks for anyone petitioning to be a guardian, to screen out people with histories of fraud or exploitation. Not all of our proposed legislation passed, politics being what it is, but we did get some significant reforms enacted. The penalties for elder exploitation were increased. The standards for guardianship were raised somewhat. Oversight of guardians was improved. It wasn't everything we wanted, but it was progress, and I knew that the changes we made might protect other elderly people from going through what I went through. My own life settled into a new normal over the months and years following the case. I continued living in my beautiful historic home in Savannah, managing my own affairs, maintaining my independence. I was more cautious now about who I let into my life and my home, having learned the hard way that family relationships don't guarantee good intentions. But I wasn't isolated or paranoid. I still had friends, still volunteered, still participated in community activities. I joined a new book club, one where I felt comfortable and welcome. I took up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. I traveled more, taking trips I'd been planning for years but had put off. I went to Italy and spent 2 weeks in Tuscany, staying in a villa and taking cooking classes. I went to Ireland and traced some of my mother's family genealogy, visiting the small village where her ancestors had lived before immigrating to America. I went to the Grand Canyon and stood on the rim watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of red and gold. I lived fully, deliberately, gratefully. Every day was a gift. A day I got to spend in my own home, making my own choices, living according to my own values and preferences. I thought often of how close I'd come to losing all of that, to being locked in a nursing home with no control over any aspect of my life. And it made me appreciate my freedom even more. The house continued to appreciate in value. By 2024, it was worth close to $4 million, an unimaginable sum from the $85,000 we'd paid for it in 1982, but I never seriously considered selling it. This was my home, mine and Gerald's. Every room held memories. The kitchen where we'd cook together, experimenting with new recipes and laughing at our failures. The library where we'd spent countless evenings reading side by side. The bedroom where we'd slept for over 30 years, where I'd held his hand as he died. The garden where I'd planted roses and tended them for decades. The house was more than just an asset worth millions. It was the physical embodiment of the life we'd built together, the proof that two people, from very different backgrounds, could create something beautiful and lasting. Leaving it, selling it, would have felt like betraying Gerald and everything we'd worked for. So I stayed, and I intended to stay until the day I died. I thought sometimes about Derek and Patricia and what had driven them to do what they'd done. Was it just greed? Was it resentment that had built wealth while they struggled financially? Was it entitlement, a belief that as family they had a right to my assets? Was it just pure predatory opportunism, seeing an elderly woman living alone and deciding she was an easy target? Probably some combination of all of those things. But what struck me most was the lack of empathy, the complete inability or unwillingness to see me as a full human, being with rights and feelings and dignity. To them, I wasn't Aunt Rosalind, who had a rich life and meaningful relationships and the right to control my own destiny. I was just an obstacle standing between them and money they felt entitled to, a problem to be solved, an old woman whose personhood didn't matter. That dehumanization is at the heart of elder abuse. When you stop seeing elderly people as real people and start seeing them only as sources of money or as burdens to be managed, abuse becomes possible. It's the same dynamic that allows any form of abuse. The abuser stops seeing the victim as fully human and therefore feels justified in exploiting them. I wanted my story to remind people that elderly individuals are still people. We're not children. We're not incompetent just because we've lived a long time. We're not empty vessels waiting to be filled with other people's decisions about our lives. We have experiences, knowledge, preferences, values, the right to make our own choices, even if others disagree with those choices. Age doesn't erase personhood. If anything, it deepens it, adding layers of experience and wisdom that deserve respect, not exploitation. As I approached my 85th birthday in 2025, I reflected on everything that had happened and everything I'd learned. I thought about the scared woman I'd been when Derek first showed up with Howard Blackwell, trying to pressure me into giving up control of my affairs. I thought about the lonely months of gathering evidence, installing security cameras, recording conversations, building a case while my own family plotted against me. I thought about the terror of the guardianship hearing, knowing that my freedom hung in the balance, that one wrong answer or one judge's bad decision could cost me everything. But I also thought about the strength I'd discovered in myself, the willingness to fight for my rights even when it meant going against family, the courage to stand up in court and tell my truth. I thought about the allies who'd helped me, Margaret, who fought brilliantly on my behalf, the doctors who evaluated me fairly and testified honestly, the friends who supported me, the prosecutor who took my case seriously and pursued justice. I thought about the changes that had come from my case, the strengthened laws, the educational programs, the heightened awareness of elder exploitation. I thought about the letters I received from people who'd been helped by my story, who found the courage to fight back against their own exploiters because they'd seen that it was possible to win. And I thought about what it meant to age with dignity, to reach 85 years old with autonomy intact, with the right to make my own decisions preserved, with my personhood recognized and respected. That was the real victory. More important than the money or the house or any material asset, the victory was maintaining my humanity, my identity as a competent adult capable of self-determination, in a society that too often strips elderly people of those things. I continued my advocacy work as I aged. At 85, I was slowing down physically. My knees ached more than they used to. I got tired more easily. I had to be more careful on stairs, but my mind remained sharp and I used it. I wrote articles about elder rights. I consulted on legislation. I spoke to community groups when my energy permitted. I mentored other elderly people who were facing exploitation, sharing what I'd learned, helping them find attorneys and resources and courage. Margaret remained my attorney and became a close friend. She visited regularly, not in a professional capacity, but just to have tea and conversation. She was in her 60s now, thinking about her own retirement, joking that she'd learned from my case the importance of protecting herself from potential exploitation by her own family. But it wasn't really a joke. She'd seen firsthand how easily greed could corrupt family relationships, and she'd taken steps to protect herself. I made new friends through my advocacy work, people who shared my passion for protecting elderly rights. Some were elderly themselves, survivors of exploitation or attempted exploitation who wanted to help others. Some were younger people who worked in elder law or social services or adult protective services, professionals dedicated to fighting elder abuse. We formed a community, a network of people who understood the challenges elderly people face and were committed to addressing them. And I maintained my independence fiercely, perhaps more fiercely than I would have if I hadn't been through the guardianship battle. I was determined to prove to myself and to anyone who might doubt me that I could manage my own life at 85 just as competently as I'd managed it at 75 or 65 or any other age. I balanced my checkbook, paid my bills, maintained my home, managed my health, made my own decisions about everything, from what to eat for breakfast to how to invest my retirement accounts. Were there things I needed help with? Of course. I hired someone to clean my house because scrubbing floors hurt my knees. I hired a handyman for repairs that required climbing ladders or heavy lifting. I used a grocery delivery service because carrying heavy bags was harder than it used to be. But needing help with physical tasks didn't mean I needed someone to take over my life. I could hire help and supervise it while still maintaining control over my own affairs. That distinction is crucial and often lost in discussions about elderly care. Needing assistance is not the same as being incompetent. Needing help with physical tasks is not the same as needing a guardian to make all your decisions. But too often, family members or medical providers see an elderly person struggling with something physical and jump to the conclusion that they need comprehensive help, that they can't manage their own lives, that someone needs to take over. I became an advocate for what I called proportionate assistance. The idea that help for elderly people should be tailored to their actual needs, not some blanket assumption about what old people require. If someone needs help with yard work, hire a gardener. If someone needs help with housework, hire a housekeeper. If someone needs help remembering to take medications, set up a pill organizer or hire a visiting nurse. But don't jump straight to, you need to move to assisted living or you need a guardian to manage everything. Provide help where it's actually needed while preserving independence in all other areas. This seems obvious, but it's surprisingly controversial. There's a paternalistic streak in how society views elderly people, a tendency to assume we need more help than we actually do, to infantilize us, to make decisions for us that we are perfectly capable of making ourselves. I fought against that paternalism every day in big ways and small ways. When a doctor talked down to me or made assumptions about my capabilities based on my age, I called it out. When someone tried to speak to my companion instead of to me, assuming I couldn't understand or answer for myself, I insisted they address me directly. When businesses or services tried to push me toward options for seniors that were more restrictive or less independent, I demanded the same options available to younger adults. It was exhausting sometimes, constantly having to prove my competency, constantly having to push back against assumptions about what an 85-year-old woman could or couldn't do. But it was also necessary. Every time I stood up for myself, I was standing up for all elderly people who face similar assumptions and condescension. As I write this now, I am 86 years old. It's been 7 years since the guardianship hearing, 7 years since I stood in that courtroom and defended my right to manage my own life. Derek served his 5 years in prison and was released about a year ago. He lives somewhere in South Georgia now, working a low-wage job. His professional career destroyed by his criminal record. We have no contact, of course, due to the permanent restraining order. I don't know if he feels any remorse for what he did. I suspect not. People who are capable of that level of exploitation rarely have the capacity for genuine remorse. Patricia served her 3 years and was released about 2 years ago. She moved back to the small town where she grew up, lives with her mother, works as a cashier at a grocery store. Her children are teenagers now, growing up knowing their mother is a convicted felon who tried to exploit her own aunt. I feel sorry for them, innocent victims of their mother's greed and poor judgment. The other family members who were involved have mostly moved on with their lives, carrying criminal records but having avoided prison. We have no contact. That entire branch of my family tree has been cut off, severed permanently by their betrayal. I have no regrets about that. Some people have suggested I should forgive them, that family is important, that holding grudges is unhealthy. But forgiveness doesn't mean allowing abusers back into your life. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the abuse didn't happen or that it wasn't serious. I have forgiven them in the sense that I don't spend my days consumed with anger or thoughts of revenge. I've moved on with my life, but I haven't forgotten what they did, and I will never allow them another opportunity to hurt me. The house is still mine, still beautiful, still my home. I walk through it every day, running my hands along the original woodwork that Gerald and I restored, looking at the art we collected over a lifetime, tending the garden where I planted roses decades ago. I'm still here, still independent, still making my own decisions about my own life. And when I die, which will happen someday, probably not too many years from now given my age, I will die here in my own home, on my own terms, having lived my life according to my own values and choices right up until the end. That is the victory. That is what I fought for and won. My story has been shared widely now, covered in news articles, discussed in legal journals, used as a case study in seminars about elder exploitation. I have received thousands of letters and emails from people around the world telling me how my story helped them, inspired them, gave them courage to fight their own battles against exploitation. Some people have asked me what I would say to elderly people who are facing situations like mine, who have family members pressuring them or trying to take control of their lives. My advice is always the same: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If family members are suddenly very interested in your finances or your property after years of minimal contact, be suspicious. If someone is pressuring you to sign over power of attorney or make changes to your will or sell your home, ask yourself who benefits from those changes. Document everything. Keep records of conversations, financial transactions, visits from family members. If things disappear from your home, report it. If you feel threatened or exploited, tell someone, your doctor, your attorney, Adult Protective Services, the police. Don't suffer in silence thinking it's a private family matter. Elder abuse is a crime, and it should be reported and prosecuted. Get your own attorney, someone who represents you and only you, not someone your family brings in. Get independent medical evaluations if your competency is questioned. Gather evidence. Be prepared to fight if necessary. Fighting might mean going to court. It might mean getting restraining orders against family members. It might mean cutting off contact with people you once loved. It's hard, heartbreaking sometimes, but it's necessary if you want to protect yourself and preserve your autonomy. And remember that being old doesn't mean being helpless. You have rights. You have legal protections. You have the power to say no to people who want to exploit you. Use that power. Stand up for yourself. Fight back. I also have advice for younger people who have elderly family members. Respect their autonomy. Even if you disagree with their decisions, even if you think you know better than they do about what would be best for them, remember that they are adults with the right to make their own choices. Unless someone is genuinely incompetent, which requires actual medical evidence of serious cognitive impairment, they have the right to manage their own lives. If you're genuinely concerned about an elderly family member, approach them with respect and honesty. Don't go behind their back. Don't try to manipulate or control them. Offer help, but let them decide whether to accept it and on what terms. If they're making decisions you think are unwise, you can express your concerns, but ultimately their life is theirs to live, not yours to control. And examine your own motives honestly. Are you concerned about their well-being, or are you concerned about preserving an inheritance? Are you worried about their safety? Or are you worried about appearances, about what neighbors or friends might think about your elderly parents still living independently? Are you acting in their best interests or in your own interests? Be brutally honest with yourself about these questions, because self-deception is how elder abuse often starts. My case has contributed to broader conversations about ageism in society, about how we view and treat elderly people, about the assumptions we make about aging and competency. I'm encouraged by some of the changes I've seen: more awareness of elder exploitation, stronger legal protections in many states, better training for professionals who work with elderly people, more resources for elderly people who are being exploited. But there's still so much work to do. Elder abuse remains vastly underreported and underprosecuted. Many elderly people suffer in silence, either because they don't realize they're being exploited, or because they're ashamed, or because they don't know where to turn for help, or because they're afraid of the consequences of speaking up. Many cases that are reported aren't taken seriously by authorities who view them as family disputes rather than crimes. The guardianship system, while well-intentioned, remains vulnerable to abuse. It's still too easy in many jurisdictions to get a guardianship over someone who doesn't actually need one. Oversight of guardians is still inadequate in most places. The rights of people subject to guardianship proceedings are often not adequately protected. Reform is desperately needed. Ageism remains pervasive in our society. Elderly people are often viewed as burdens, as people whose best years are behind them, as less valuable than younger people. This ageism creates the cultural context in which elder abuse becomes possible. When society devalues elderly people, it becomes easier to justify exploiting them. We need to change how we think about aging and elderly people. We need to recognize that elderly people have wisdom, experience, and continuing capacity to contribute to society. We need to respect their autonomy and their right to make their own decisions. We need to create systems and structures that support independence for as long as possible, rather than pushing elderly people toward dependence before it's truly necessary. These are big systemic changes that will take time and sustained effort, but they start with individual choices and actions. They start with how each of us treats the elderly people in our own lives. They start with respecting our parents and grandparents and elderly neighbors as full human beings with rights and dignity. They start with refusing to participate in or tolerate elder abuse in any form. Now I want to hear from you, from all of you who are watching or reading this. Where are you from? What city are you calling home? I'm here in Savannah, Georgia, in the house I fought to keep, the house that represents my independence and my victory over those who tried to steal it from me. Comment your city below. Let me know where you are in this world. Let me know if you have a grandmother or grandfather or an elderly person in your life who you love and respect, who you would never exploit, who you see as a full human being deserving of dignity and autonomy. Tell me about them, celebrate them, honor them. And if you have a grandmother who taught you to be strong, who showed you what it means to fight for yourself, who refused to be a victim even when people tried to make her one, tell me about her too. Let me know her name and her story. Let's build a community of people who honor and protect our elders instead of exploiting them. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about how we treat elderly people in our society, if it made you angry about elder abuse or inspired you to stand up for elderly rights, then please do something for me. Hit that like button on this video. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss other stories about fighting back, about standing up for yourself, about refusing to be victimized, and share this story with your friends, with your family, with anyone who needs to hear it. Share it with elderly people who might be facing exploitation so they know they can fight back. Share it with younger people so they understand the seriousness of elder abuse and the importance of respecting elderly people's autonomy. Share it with professionals who work with elderly people so they can learn to recognize the signs of exploitation. Share it widely because stories like this need to be told. The more we talk about elder abuse, the more we shine a light on it, the harder it becomes for abusers to operate in the shadows. The more elderly people know their rights and know they can fight back, the more empowered they become to resist exploitation. The more society understands this issue, the more pressure there is for systemic changes to better protect vulnerable elderly people. I am Rosalind May Thornwood. I am 86 years old. I am a survivor of attempted elder exploitation. I am a retired business manager who helped build a successful law practice. I am a widow who still mourns the husband I loved for 47 years. I am a homeowner who fought to keep her home. I am an advocate who works to protect other elderly people from the abuse I experienced. I'm a competent, independent adult who manages her own life and makes her own decisions. This is my story, the story of how my family tried to have me declared mentally unfit, and how the court declared them fraudsters instead. The story of how I fought back against exploitation and won. The story of how one 80-year-old woman proved that being old doesn't mean being helpless, that age doesn't erase competency, and that elderly people have rights worth fighting for. It's not the story I would have chosen. I would have preferred to have a family that loved and respected me, that saw me as a person rather than as a source of money. I would have preferred not to have to fight this battle, not to have to defend my competency in court, not to have to cut off contact with my own blood relatives. But sometimes we don't get to choose our stories. Sometimes life throws challenges at us that we never imagined facing, and we have to decide whether to fight or to surrender. I chose to fight, and I won. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for taking the time to understand what elder exploitation looks like, for caring about the rights and dignity of elderly people. It means more than you know to share this, to help spread awareness, to maybe protect someone else from going through what I went through. Remember this always. You are never too old to stand up for yourself. You are never too vulnerable to fight back. You are never too elderly to demand justice and respect and the right to control your own life. Your rights matter at any age. Your dignity matters at any age. Your personhood matters at any age. And to anyone who would exploit elderly people, who would see their age as weakness and their vulnerability as opportunity, let my story be a warning. We are not easy targets. We have lived long lives, survived countless challenges, developed reserves of strength and wisdom you cannot imagine. We know how to fight. We know how to gather evidence. We know how to find allies. We know how to use the legal system to protect ourselves. Come for us at your own peril, because we will fight back. We will expose your schemes. We will hold you accountable. And we will win. God bless you all. Comment your cities. Tell me your stories. Share this video. Like and subscribe. Let us build a movement of respect and protection for elderly people everywhere. Let us stand together against elder abuse. Let us ensure that every elderly person can age with dignity, autonomy, and respect. This is Rosalind May Thornwood signing off. Stay strong, stay vigilant, stay free, and never ever let anyone convince you that being old means giving up your rights. Thank you, and may you all live long lives with your independence intact, your dignity preserved, and your rights respected until your very last day.